Hey everyone. Welcome back to another video. This is the first part of a story called The Founding Fathers. Summary: after a failed final attack on Kaguya, Naruto is ripped from his time and stranded in the Warring States era. Powerless and wounded, he's rescued by young Hashirama and Madara. Now, caught in a brutal past and under suspicion, he must hide the truth, survive clan politics, and change history, again. 6 paths. Hiraishin. Overpowered Naruto. Quickly before the video, the full story of Naruto going to the My Hero universe is now out over on my friend's channel. If you are interested, link to that will be in the description. As always, huge thanks to all of my Patreons. Making these videos would be impossible without you guys' support, especially with all the restrictions YouTube places on my type of content. As always, the full story is already out over there for you guys, along with about 50 other different stories you can enjoy. Also, feel free to send me any messages over there if you have any questions or even if you just want to chat. Link to all of that will be in the description. Anyways, everyone, enjoy the video. Chapter 1, A Ripple in the River. The world was white. A bone-white, soul-crushing dimension of absolute nothingness. The only features were the godlike woman floating before them and the crushing gravity that tried to grind their very bones into dust. Naruto Uzumaki spat a glob of blood onto the sterile, cracked ground. His 6 paths sage mode cloak, a brilliant flame of pure power, flickered erratically. Each flicker was a sign of his dwindling reserves. Beside him, Sasuke stood with the tense stillness of a drawn bowstring, his unique eyes, the Rinnegan and eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, swirling with a mixture of hyper-analysis and profound exhaustion. They were losing. He wouldn't admit it, not out loud. He couldn't. He was Naruto Uzumaki, the child of prophecy, the hero who never gave up. But here, in this dead world, hope was a finite resource. Kaguya Otsutsuki, the mother of all chakra, was simply beyond them. Every attack they landed was a glancing blow. Every brilliant strategy they devised was countered by her simply tearing reality open and shifting them to another of her private dimensions, resetting the battle to her advantage every single time. She's too strong, Naruto. Sasuke's voice was a low growl, strained but unbroken. His own chakra was dangerously low. We can't keep playing her game. She's just wearing us down. We need a final gambit. Naruto wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, the black truth-seeking orb materializing into a staff in his grip. He leaned on it heavily. I know. But every time we get close, she runs away. We have to seal her, Sasuke. It's the only way. He looked at his friend, his rival. It's all or nothing. High above them, Kaguya's third eye, the swirling red Rin Sharingan on her forehead, narrowed. Her voice, a melodic yet terrifyingly detached soprano, echoed in the dead air, devoid of all emotion. You are insistent children. This world, this chakra, it is all mine. I am only taking back what belongs to me. Black Zetsu, the parasitic manifestation of her will, clung to her sleeve like a tar stain, his amorphous face twisted in a cackling sneer. It's useless, Indra's and Ashura's reincarnates. Mother is eternal. She is the beginning and the end. Your struggle is but a brief, meaningless spark before the inevitable darkness. A surge of pure, hot rage, familiar and focusing, flared in Naruto's gut. He straightened his back, the staff in his hand feeling less like a crutch and more like a weapon. He thought of everyone. Sakura, Kakashi-sensei, trapped and dreaming in the cocoons of the God Tree. He thought of Obito, who had given his life for them, for this one chance. He thought of the long, bloody road that had led them here. He would not fail. He could not. Sasuke, Naruto said, his voice dropping, all trace of exhaustion gone, replaced by steel resolve. Get ready. I'm hitting her with everything I've got. All 9 Baijuu Rasen shurikens. It's gonna be massive. It'll drain me completely. You have to find the opening. Sasuke nodded once, a silent and absolute pact. Chidori, the scream of 1,000 birds, crackled to life in his hand, its sharp light a stark contrast to the oppressive white. Just make one. With a roar that shook the very foundations of the dimension, Naruto began to mold the chakra. 9 distinct, god-tier powers flared to life around him. Shukaku's grating sand-infused wind, Madatabi's ghostly blue fire, Isabu's crushing water, Son Goku's molten lava, Kokuo's boiling steam, Seiken's corrosive acid, Chomei's blinding scales, Gyuki's ink-black energy, and Kurama's own unparalleled, furious power. All of it swirled into 9 separate, screaming spheres of destructive, world-breaking energy. The air warped. The ground shattered and floated upwards. It was the most powerful attack he had ever conceived. For the first time since their battle began, a flicker of something other than serene arrogance crossed Kaguya's face. It was alarm. Mother, his power is immense. Black Zetsu shrieked, his voice cracking with genuine fear. You must not allow it to strike. Send us away. Anywhere. As Naruto drew his arms back, ready to unleash the cataclysm, Kaguya moved. But she didn't flee. She didn't change dimensions. Instead, she thrust a pale, elegant hand forward, and reality tore open right in front of him. It wasn't a controlled tear like Obito's Kamui. It was a violent, chaotic rupture, a swirling vortex of pitch-black energy that screamed with the sound of grinding worlds. It was not a door, it was a wound. Perish, Kaguya whispered, and the word was a command to the universe itself. The gravitational pull was immense, unnatural. It didn't just pull at Naruto's body, it pulled at his chakra, at his very soul, trying to unspool him like a thread. The 9 Rasen shurikens, unstable without his absolute focus, wobbled, broke apart, and dissolved into a harmless shower of multicolored sparks. His ultimate attack, wasted. Naruto, Sasuke yelled, his amino Tejikara activating as he tried to swap places with a piece of floating debris near Naruto, but the vortex seemed to warp space itself, rejecting the technique with a violent shudder. Naruto's feet slid across the ground, kicking up dust that was immediately sucked into the void. He saw Black Zetsu's triumphant, twisted grin. He saw Sasuke's outstretched hand, a look of genuine, raw panic on his rival's face that would be burned into his memory forever. Then came the tearing sensation, a feeling like his entire being was being threaded through the eye of a needle. There was a moment of excruciating, world-ending pain, a flash of every color he had ever seen and 1,000 he hadn't, and a long, agonizing fall into cold, suffocating darkness. The first sensation was the gentle, rhythmic lapping of water against his cheek. The second was the rough, unyielding surface of a rock digging painfully into his ribs. Consciousness returned not as a gentle dawn, but as a throbbing, full-body ache, a deep, cellular exhaustion that made even breathing feel like a monumental effort. He groaned, the sound a dry, pathetic rasp. He was hanging, half in and half out of the water, draped over a large, smooth stone in the middle of a river. His limbs were heavy, unresponsive. He tried to muster a flicker of chakra, just enough to assess his own condition, and found nothing. The wellspring that was his life force, a roaring sun of energy just moments ago, was now a barren wasteland. It wasn't just empty, it felt broken. Damaged. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to cut through the haze, but he was too tired to even feel it properly. He managed to crack an eye open. The world was a blurry smear of green and blue. Trees, lush and vibrant. A brilliant blue sky. Sunlight warming his skin. It was real. Wherever Kaguya had sent him, it was a real place. Not another prison dimension. A young voice, bright and full of boundless optimism, cut through the air. See? I told you. A 5 skip. Can you beat that, Madara? Another voice, deeper and more cynical, replied with an audible scoff. Humph. A child's game. True strength is measured in the perfection of a technique, not in how many times you can make a flat stone bounce. That requires luck. My methods require only skill. Watch. Naruto's head throbbed. He heard the sharp whiz of a projectile, followed by a series of crisp taps on the water's surface, far more than 5. The first voice let out a low whistle of appreciation. 7. Not bad. You're getting better. I am always getting better, Hashirama. Unlike some people, I take my training seriously. The names hit Naruto's foggy brain like a physical blow. Hashirama. Madara. No. It couldn't be. It was a coincidence. A dream. His exhausted mind playing tricks on him. He tried to push himself up, to get a better look, but his arm slipped on the wet rock, and he slumped back with a pained grunt. The sound, small as it was, carried across the water with perfect clarity. The cheerful banter stopped. Silence descended, broken only by the chirping of unseen birds and the gentle flow of the river. Did you hear that? It was the first voice, Hashirama's, now laced with curiosity. I heard it, the second, Madara's, replied, his tone shifting instantly from arrogant to cautious. It came from the rocks in the middle of the river. There was a soft splash, then another. They were coming closer. Naruto's heart began to hammer against his ribs, a frantic, weak rhythm. He had no chakra, no strength. He was completely vulnerable. He forced his eyes open, blinking against the bright sun glinting off the water. 2 figures resolved out of the blur. They were boys, no older than 12 or 13. One had a wild mop of shoulder-length black hair and was dressed in simple, dark shinobi pants and a mesh shirt. The other had long, straight black hair that framed a pale, aristocratic face, and his eyes. His eyes were as dark and intense as a starless night. Even at this age, there was no mistaking the regal, dangerous bearing of the Uchiha. Naruto's breath hitched. It wasn't a dream. Standing before him, looking down with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, were the living, breathing founders of the Hidden Leaf Village, Hashirama, Senju and Madara Uchiha. Hashirama's eyes were wide with concern. He's hurt. We have to help him. Madara's hand instinctively went to the tanto strapped to his back. His gaze was sharp, analytical, missing nothing. He took in the tattered remains of Naruto's orange and black clothing, the strange metal of his headband's plate, though the leaf symbol was gone, melted away in some forgotten battle, and the shock of his sunbright blonde hair. Stay back, Hashirama, Madara warned, his voice a low command. Look at him. His clothes are like nothing I've ever seen. And his hair. He could be a spy. From the Hagoromo, maybe? Or some other clan trying to get a foothold in our territory. A spy who washes up half-drowned and unconscious? Hashirama countered, taking a cautious step closer. He was a censor, even then, his natural talent undeniable. He closed his eyes, his brow furrowed in concentration. His chakra. It's almost gone. It's like a flickering candle about to go out. I've never felt anything so faint. He's no threat to us. A weak chakra signature could be a disguise, Madara retorted, his eyes narrowed. A trick to make you lower your guard. The best deception is one the target wants to believe. And you, my friend, always want to believe the best in people. Naruto watched the exchange through slitted eyes, his mind reeling. They were so young. Hashirama's idealism was already shining through, a bright, powerful force. And Madara's caution was born not of malice, but of a harsh reality. He lived in a world where a stranger on a riverbank was more likely to be an assassin than a person in need. This was the Warring States period. A time of endless, brutal conflict. We can't just leave him here to die, Hashirama insisted, his voice firm. That's not who we are. It's not what our village will be about. We don't have a village yet, Madara reminded him darkly. We have clans. And my clan would kill him on sight for looking different. As would yours. Bringing him to either of our homes is a death sentence for him, and a risk for us. Then we won't take him to our clans, Hashirama declared, his mind made up. Not yet. We'll find a cave, somewhere safe upriver. We'll wait for him to wake up. We'll find out who he is. We can't let our clan's paranoia be the reason an innocent person dies. That's the whole reason we want to change things, isn't it? Madara was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on Naruto. He was weighing the risks, the possibilities. Finally, he gave a reluctant, almost imperceptible nod. Fine. A cave. But if he so much as twitches suspiciously, I'm putting a kunai in his throat. Agreed? Agreed, Hashirama said, a relieved smile breaking out on his face. He waded closer and knelt beside Naruto. Hey, he said softly. Can you hear me? We're not going to hurt you. Naruto wanted to respond, to say something, but the world was fading again. The stress, the shock, the utter depletion of his body, it was too much. As Hashirama and Madara carefully worked together to lift his deadweight form from the rock, Naruto's consciousness slipped away once more, plunging him back into the comforting embrace of darkness, the last thing he saw being the concerned face of the boy who would become the first Hokage. He woke in a damp cave. A small fire crackled, pushing back the gloom and casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. He was on a bed of scavenged furs, a rough but warm blanket covering him. He'd been drifting in and out for what felt like days. Each time he surfaced, it was just for a moment. A blurry image of one of the two boys tending the fire, a hushed voice, the taste of cool water being dribbled onto his lips, then darkness again. He listened to their conversations, fragmented and dreamlike. They spoke of training, of their fathers, of the endless, pointless battles. They spoke of a shared dream, a place where their younger brothers wouldn't have to die, a village where clans could live in peace. Konoha. His heart ached hearing them speak of it with such fragile hope. This time, when Naruto woke, the haze had finally lifted. The crushing exhaustion had receded to a deep, persistent ache. He could feel his chakra, no longer a barren wasteland, but a tiny, trickling spring. It was a pathetic amount, less than he'd had as a fresh academy graduate, but it was there. It was slowly, painstakingly, refilling. He risked opening the connection to his inner world. The link was faint, staticky, like a bad radio signal, but it held. He poured his focus into it and found himself standing before the great gate of his seal. His mindscape was dark and unnervingly quiet. The familiar sewer tunnels were cracked and dry, and the water that normally covered the floor was gone, replaced by murky, stagnant puddles. Curled up in the center of the chamber, his 9 tails wrapped around him like a protective shroud, was Kurama. The great Baijuwu was sleeping a deep, unnatural sleep. His chakra, usually a raging inferno that lit up the entire space, was banked to a mere ember. Naruto could feel the fox's exhaustion, a bone-deep weariness that mirrored his own. The dimensional travel had taken a catastrophic toll on him, too. He was in a state of hibernation, a deep recovery cycle. "Kurama?" Naruto called out, his voice echoing in the vast, silent chamber. "Hey, you big furball. Wake up." There was no response. Not even a twitch of an ear. For the first time since landing in this era, Naruto felt a profound and terrifying loneliness. He was on his own. No sage advice from the fox, no borrowed cloak of immense power. Just him. He withdrew from his mindscape, his breath catching in his throat. He had to be smart. Smarter than he had ever been in his life. One wrong move, one slip of the tongue, and he would not only die but could potentially shatter the entire timeline. He sat up slowly, his muscles protesting with a groan. Hashirama, who had been dozing by the fire, started, his eyes snapping open. "You're awake," he exclaimed, a wide, friendly grin spreading across his face. "For real this time. How are you feeling?" Naruto's throat was dry. He swallowed, his voice coming out as a croak. Where am I?" "You're in a cave near the Naka River," Hashirama said, moving closer and offering a water skin. Naruto took it gratefully, drinking deeply. "My friend and I found you a few days ago. You were in pretty bad shape. Who are you? What happened?" Naruto's mind raced. Cover story. I need a cover story. Something believable. Something that's not a complete lie. He latched onto the only piece of his identity that might work here. A partial truth. "My name is Naruto," he said, his voice gaining a little strength. He looked at Hashirama, trying to project an aura of harmlessness. "As for what happened, I don't remember everything clearly. There was an attack. Bandits, I think. My family. We were traveling." He drew on the real pain of his past, the loneliness of his childhood, and let it color his voice. "I'm from the Uzumaki clan." Hashirama's eyes widened. "Uzumaki? From the land of whirlpools? You're a long way from home." The Senju and Uzumaki were distant relatives, allies even in this chaotic time. It was the perfect choice. "We weren't from Whirlpool directly," Naruto improvised, building the lie brick by brick, feeling sweat on his brow. "A wandering branch of the family. We traveled, traded in Fuinjutsu scrolls. Our caravan was ambushed near the mountains. I was wounded. I think I fell into the river. The rest is a blur." It was flimsy, but it was something. Hashirama, true to his nature, seemed to accept it without question. "The Uzumaki. I should have guessed, you have so much life force, even with your chakra depleted. My clan has always held yours in high regard." Then he paused, his gaze going to Naruto's head. "But your hair. I've always heard that the Uzumaki have vibrant red hair." Naruto managed a weak, self-deprecating grin, hoping the charm that had gotten him out of trouble with Grandpa Hiruzen and Iruka-sensei would work here. "Yeah, I get that a lot. Guess I'm the exception that proves the rule. My mother always said I was a throwback to a distant ancestor. Maybe a namikaze?" He threw the name out there, a ghost from his own time, meaningless here. "Believe it." The familiar verbal tick slipped out, and for a second, he froze, worried it was too strange. But Hashirama just laughed, a loud, booming sound that filled the small cave. "I like you, Naruto. You've got spirit." Just then, the shadows at the mouth of the cave deepened, and Madara stepped inside. He had a brace of rabbits slung over his shoulder, his expression as impassive as ever. His eyes immediately locked onto the now conscious Naruto. "He's awake," Madara stated, his voice flat. "He is. And guess what? He's an Uzumaki," Hashirama announced proudly, as if he had solved a great mystery. Madara's eyes narrowed. He looked from Naruto's face to his blonde hair, his gaze lingering for a moment, and Naruto felt a chill run down his spine. It was a look of pure, undiluted suspicion. Madara didn't say a word, but his silence was more damning than any accusation. He didn't believe a word of it. "I have to go," Madara said abruptly, dropping the rabbits on the ground. "My father will be expecting me." "Don't get too comfortable with him, Hashirama. An Uzumaki with yellow hair is as likely as a Senju with weak chakra." He shot Naruto one last piercing look before melting back into the forest. Hashirama sighed, his good mood deflating slightly. "Don't mind him. He's just cautious. Life has made him that way. He turned back to Naruto, his smile returning, though it was a little strained. We can't keep you in this cave forever. You're still weak. You need proper food, a real bed. I'm going to take you back to my clan. Naruto's blood ran cold. The Senju compound. The heart of enemy territory for the Uchiha, and a place filled with powerful censors and shinobi who would be even more suspicious than Madara. It was the last place he wanted to go. But what choice did he have? Out here, he was dead. In the Senju compound, he was merely in mortal danger. Are you sure that's a good idea? It's the best idea I have, Hashirama said with a determined set to his jaw. My father. He can be strict. But he is a man of reason. He'll understand. And Tobirama, my younger brother, he's a bit like Madara, but he'll come around. Don't worry, Naruto. I'll protect you. Naruto looked into the earnest, hopeful eyes of the boy who would one day be hailed as the god of shinobi and felt a strange mix of hope and dread. He was placing his life in the hands of a 12-year-old idealist. It was a terrible plan. And it was the only one he had. Okay, Hashirama, Naruto said with a resigned sigh, forcing another smile. I'm in your hands. The journey to the Senju compound was tense. Hashirama led him through dense forest, following paths that were invisible to Naruto's untrained eye. The air to the Senju was unusually quiet, the weight of what he was about to do settling on his young shoulders. As they walked, Naruto took in the world around him. It was wilder, more primal than his own time. The trees were larger, the air felt cleaner, and the ambient hum of nature chakra was almost intoxicating. He could feel why someone like Hashirama would be born in this era. They finally arrived at a massive clearing. The Senju compound was a fortress. A 30-foot wooden palisade, crudely but effectively built, encircled the entire settlement. Watchtowers manned by sharp-eyed shinobi were spaced at regular intervals, their gaze sweeping over the surrounding forest. The air hummed with an undercurrent of tension and chakra, the feeling of a coiled spring ready to snap at the slightest provocation. As Hashirama led Naruto through the main gate, conversation stopped. Every head turned towards them. The stares were not friendly. They were cold, hard, and questioning. These were the faces of people who had known nothing but war. They saw a stranger, and their hands instinctively moved towards their weapon pouches. A group of children, none older than 8, stopped their training with live kunai to stare, their eyes holding a hardness that no child should possess. Stay close, Hashirama murmured, his usual cheerfulness replaced by a grim determination. He led Naruto through the heart of the compound, past long houses that served as barracks and past a smithy where the clang of hammer on steel rang out. He was heading for the largest, most central building. This, Naruto presumed, was where the clan head resided. The moment they stepped inside, the temperature seemed to drop. The room was Spartan, functional, dominated by a large table covered in maps and strategic markers. Standing at the head of the table was a man who was the spitting image of an older, harder Hashirama. His long black hair was tied back, his face was etched with the lines of command and loss, and he wore dark red samurai-style armor. His aura was one of absolute, unquestionable authority. This was Butsuma Senju. Standing beside him was a smaller figure, a boy with shaggy white hair, red markings on his cheeks, and eyes the color of blood. He wore a simple blue kimono, but he stood with a soldier's posture. His gaze, sharp and analytical, immediately fell on Naruto. It was like being appraised by a predator. Tobirama Senju. Hashirama, Butsuma's voice was a low rumble, devoid of warmth. Explain this. Hashirama stood up straight, his filial respect warring with his innate compassion. Father. This is Naruto. I found him by the river. He's from the Uzumaki clan, his family was killed by bandits. He is injured and needs our help. As our allies, it is our duty to offer him shelter. Butsuma's eyes swept over Naruto, cold and dismissive. He has yellow hair. It was Tobirama who spoke next, his voice chillingly adult for a boy who couldn't have been more than 10. His chakra signature is strange. He took a slow, deliberate step towards Naruto, his head cocked. It's weak, yes. Almost non-existent. But the quality of it. The very nature of what little is there, it feels ancient. And there's an echo of something else. Something vast and dark and hateful, hidden deep beneath the surface like a monster at the bottom of a lake. Naruto's heart leapt into his throat. He can sense Kurama? Even in hibernation? This boy was a genius. A terrifying, pint-sized genius. He was 100 times the sensor anyone from Naruto's time had been. He is a threat, Tobirama declared with absolute certainty, his red eyes narrowing. His story is convenient. His appearance is an anomaly. He is a spy. He should be interrogated and executed. Tobirama, Hashirama snapped, stepping protectively in front of Naruto. He is our guest. He is an Uzumaki. We can't treat an ally like this. Prove he is an ally, Tobirama shot back, unmoved. Make him prove it. Otherwise, he is just a variable we cannot afford. Butsuma raised a hand, and silence fell instantly. He walked around the table until he was standing directly in front of Naruto. He was shorter than Naruto, but the sheer force of his presence made Naruto feel small. You will be given a room, Butsuma said, his voice leaving no room for argument. It will have a lock on the outside. You will be given food. And you will be watched. Every second of every day. You will work. You will earn your keep. At the first sign of deception, the first hint of betrayal, my son, he gestured to Tobirama, will have my full permission to dispose of you. Are we clear? Naruto met his gaze without flinching, channeling every bit of the future Hokage he was meant to be. Crystal clear. Butsuma grunted, seemingly satisfied for the moment. Tobirama, show him to the empty barracks in the west quadrant. Post a guard. Tobirama nodded, a flicker of disappointment in his eyes that he wasn't allowed to perform an immediate dissection. He gestured sharply for Naruto to follow. As Naruto turned to leave, he caught Hashirama's eye. The boy gave him a small, encouraging nod, a silent promise that he hadn't given up. The weeks that followed were a grueling test of patience and control. Naruto was, for all intents and purposes, a prisoner. His room was a small, windowless cell. He was assigned menial, backbreaking labor, chopping wood, hauling water, mucking out the stables for the clan's messenger hawks. And always, Tobirama was there. Sometimes he would watch from the shadows, a silent, judging presence. Other times, he would approach Naruto directly, asking him deceptively simple questions. Tell me of the tides of Whirlpool, Uzumaki. How do they affect the shipping lanes? I wouldn't know, Naruto would reply easily, scrubbing a floor. As I said, my family was nomadic. We haven't seen the sea in generations. An Uzumaki who doesn't know the sea, Tobirama would murmur, filing the information away. Curious. One afternoon, while mending a fence near a training ground, Naruto watched Tobirama practice. The young prodigy moved with a grace and precision that was breathtaking, creating complex water dragons that crashed against the earth. He saw Naruto watching, and with a flick of his wrist, sent a whip of water cracking just inches from Naruto's face. Is there something you find interesting, Uzumaki? Tobirama asked, his tone dripping with disdain. Naruto just offered a wide, sunny grin. Yeah. That's amazing. The way you shape the water is incredible. How do you do that without any hand signs? Believe it. The genuine, almost idiotic, enthusiasm seemed to throw Tobirama off balance. He just scoffed and turned back to his training, though Naruto noticed his movements were a little more flashy than before. Naruto knew he was walking on a knife's edge. He focused on his recovery. Every night, in the privacy of his cell, he would meditate, carefully coaxing his shattered chakra coils back to life. He kept his reserves suppressed, maintaining the pathetic level of a low Jinan, just enough to not seem completely useless. The vast ocean of power he held, Sage Mode, the Baijuu chakra, he kept locked away, hidden behind a dam of sheer willpower. He slowly made inroads with others. He used the one weapon they didn't expect, his personality. He was relentlessly cheerful with the guards. He would help the elderly women carry their heavy baskets. He would use a simple, harmless transformation jutsu to entertain the children, turning himself into a fat, clumsy toad, which sent them into fits of giggles. These small acts of kindness chipped away at the clan's distrust, earning him grudging acceptance from some, and outright confusion from most. Hashirama visited him often, smuggling him better food and telling him of his dream for a village. One evening, he led Naruto to a hidden clearing deep within the compound's forest. With a look of intense concentration, he placed his hands on the ground, and a small sapling sprouted from the earth, growing into a small tree in a matter of seconds. It was a crude, uncontrolled version of the power he would one day master. What do you think? Hashirama asked, his face beaming with a mixture of pride and fear. It's my secret. Father says I shouldn't rely on it, that I should perfect the clan's water style. But this feels right. Naruto looked at the tree, the first wood style he had seen created by its originator, and felt a sense of profound awe. It's amazing, Hashirama. It's a gift. A power not of destruction, but of life. Cherish it. Hashirama's smile was brighter than the sun. He had found someone who understood. But for every step forward, there was the unblinking scrutiny of Tobirama. Naruto's charm had no effect on him. His displays of humility were seen as deception. His kindness to the children was viewed as a tactic to gather information. Tobirama Senju was a fortress, and Naruto had found no way to breach its walls. The tenuous peace couldn't last. The world outside the compound walls was still at war, and sooner or later, the war would come for them. It came on a cool autumn evening. A frantic ringing of the alarm bell sent the compound into a controlled frenzy. A messenger hawk arrived, a frantic message clutched in its claws. The clan elders were summoned. A council of war was convened. Naruto, who was mending a fence nearby under the watchful eye of a Senju guard, saw the grim expressions on the faces of the shinobi entering the main hall. Later that night, Butsuma Senju himself came to Naruto's cell. Tobirama was at his side, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "A large force from the land of lightning has crossed our borders," Butsuma said without preamble. "The A clan. They are moving to annex the fertile valleys to the north. They are powerful, fast, and ruthless. We ride out at dawn to meet them." He stared at Naruto, his gaze hard as forged steel. "You have eaten our food and slept under our roof for almost 2 months, Uzumaki. You have claimed to be the scion of an allied clan. Tomorrow, you will prove it." It wasn't a request. It was an order. "You will fight with us," Butsuma declared. "You will stand on the front lines. Your performance will determine your fate. If you are truly an ally, you will fight for us. If you are a spy, you will be exposed. And if you are a coward, you will die." This was it. The test Tobirama had been waiting for. This was his chance to be proven right. But as Naruto looked at them, he didn't feel fear. He felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time: anticipation. The exhaustion, the hiding, the pretending, it was over. He was a shinobi. He was Naruto Uzumaki. And it was time to teach this ancient world what that meant. He stood up, his expression calm. "I understand." Butsuma nodded once, then turned and swept out of the room, Tobirama following like his shadow, a glint of cruel satisfaction in his red eyes. Alone in the dim light of his cell, Naruto closed his eyes. He let his senses expand, feeling the cool night air, the thrum of nervous energy throughout the compound. Deep within him, the tiny spring of his chakra continued to trickle, filling a reservoir that was now far, far larger than anyone suspected. He reached out, not with his chakra, but with his very essence, and for the first time in this era, he drew upon the natural energy of the world. It flooded into him, a pure, powerful torrent. He didn't allow the transformation to show on his face, but he could feel the power settling into his bones, a familiar, comforting weight. Sage mode. The power of the toads. A strength that was his and his alone. He would not use Kurama's power. He would not use the 6-path sage mode. He wouldn't have to. Tomorrow, on the battlefield, he would show the Senju clan what a wandering Uzumaki could do. And he would give Tobirama the surprise of his young, suspicious life. A small, dangerous smile touched Naruto's lips. The ripple he had made in the river was about to become a tidal wave. Chapter 2, The Sound of Thunder. Dawn broke cold and gray, the sky the color of unpolished steel. There was no birdsong. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath. The Senju compound was a hive of quiet, focused activity. Shinobi moved with grim purpose, checking their armor, sharpening their blades, and strapping on pouches filled with kunai, shuriken, and explosive tags. The air was thick with the scent of metal, oil, and nervous sweat. Naruto stood in the central courtyard, a borrowed tanto strapped to his waist. It felt foreign and clumsy. He hadn't worn a sword since his earliest days as a genin. The Senju had given him a standard set of dark blue shinobi pants and a mesh shirt, but no armor. He was an expendable asset, and they weren't about to waste precious resources on him. A single guard stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable, but his hand never strayed far from his weapon. Hashirama found him there, already clad in the red-plated armor of the Senju clan. It made him look older, more serious, but his eyes still held a deep-seated worry. "Naruto," he began, his voice low. "You don't have to do this. You could refuse. Stay here. My father is harsh, but he wouldn't kill you for refusing to fight a battle that isn't yours." Naruto offered a small, reassuring smile, though he wasn't sure who it was meant to reassure more, Hashirama or himself. "It's okay, Hashirama. Your clan gave me food and shelter. It's the least I can do. Besides," he added, a familiar glint in his eye, "I've never been one to run from a fight." "But the A clan?" Hashirama hesitated. "They're different. They don't fight with tactics and strategy like we do against the Uchiha. They are a thunderstorm. Raw power and overwhelming speed. Their lightning release armor is said to be impenetrable. Every jutsu has a weakness, Naruto said simply, the words of Jiraiya and Kakashi echoing in his mind. Before Hashirama could reply, Tobirama approached. He too was in full armor, a smaller, sharper version of his older brother. His gaze swept over Naruto with clinical disdain. Save your sentiment, brother, Tobirama said, his voice crisp and cold. He is here for one reason, to prove he is not a spy. His survival is secondary to that objective. If he dies, we have our answer. If he fights and proves useful, we have a new asset. Either way, the clan benefits. Tobirama, Hashirama hissed, his face flushing with anger. Am I wrong? Tobirama challenged, his red eyes unwavering. He turned his gaze back to Naruto. Do not get in my way, Uzumaki. Do not slow me down. If you become a liability on the battlefield, I will cut you down myself. Naruto just met his gaze, his expression placid. He knew arguing was pointless. Tobirama wasn't a man who could be convinced by words. He understood only one thing: results. Butsuma Senju emerged from the main hall, his presence silencing the entire courtyard. He surveyed his warriors, his eyes lingering on Naruto for a fraction of a second, a silent acknowledgement of the ultimatum he had delivered. We march. Butsuma's voice boomed, sharp and clear as a sword strike. For the honor and survival of the Senju. Move out. With a unified roar, the 100-strong force of Senju shinobi surged forward, moving out of the compound gates like a great wave. Naruto, flanked by his guard, was swept along in the current, a lone blonde head in a sea of dark-haired warriors. He was no longer a guest, no longer a prisoner. He was a variable in a deadly equation, and the time for solving it was fast approaching. The march was a grueling, silent affair. The Senju moved through the dense forests of the Land of Fire with a practiced ease that spoke of generations of warfare. They flowed over the landscape, their footsteps barely making a sound, their senses on high alert. Naruto, even without actively using his sensory abilities, could feel the tension radiating from them. Every snapped twig, every rustle of leaves, brought hands to weapons. He kept to the middle of the formation, as ordered. The Senju around him gave him a wide berth, their conversations dying whenever he drew near. They saw him as Tobirama did, an unknown, a potential threat. He was a foreign body, and the clan's immune system was on the verge of rejecting him. He used the time to observe. He watched how they communicated with silent hand signals, how they instinctively formed defensive formations when crossing open ground. They were good. They were veterans, honed by a lifetime of conflict. But there was a fragility to them, too. He saw it in the eyes of the younger shinobi, boys who couldn't have been much older than Konohamaru, trying to mask their fear with bravado. This was the reality Madara and Hashirama wanted to escape. After hours of marching, Butsuma called a halt. They were on a ridge overlooking a wide, grassy valley. A river snaked through the middle of it. It was a perfect place for an ambush. Scouts, report, Butsuma commanded. 3 shinobi shimmered into existence before him, appearing from the foliage as if they were made of it. Lord Butsuma, the lead scout reported, the Eye are camped 3 miles ahead, in the heart of the valley. A force of at least 80. They're not hiding. They're waiting for us. Their commander is a man they call Hiraishin the Swift. Butsuma nodded, his expression grim. Tobirama, your analysis. Tobirama stepped forward, his eyes scanning the map unrolled on the ground. They have chosen their ground deliberately. The open valley favors their speed. There's little cover for us to utilize our water-style jutsu effectively without a direct source. The river is their bait. If we approach it, they will flank us from the higher ground on the far side. So we meet them head-on? One of the Senju captains asked. No, Tobirama said immediately. That's what they expect. A direct clash of power. We will use the forest to our advantage. We split into 3 units. Father, you will lead the main force as a direct feint. I will take a smaller, faster unit and circle around through the western woods to strike their command tent. The 3rd unit will hold the rear and prevent encirclement. It was a sound, logical strategy. Naruto found himself nodding in approval. Tobirama might be a suspicious, cold-hearted brat, but his strategic mind was undeniable. And him? Tobirama asked, flicking his gaze towards Naruto. What do we do with the variable? All eyes turned to Naruto. He could feel the weight of their suspicion, the unspoken question of his loyalty. Butsuma considered for a moment. He stays with the main force. With me. I will observe him personally. Naruto felt a surge of something akin to respect for the old clan leader. Butsuma was not a man who delegated his risks. He would face them head-on. But father, Hashirama interjected, he's an Uzumaki. They're masters of Fuinjutsu. Maybe he has sealing tags or barrier jutsu that could help us? Naruto's mind raced. He could easily slap together some explosive tags far more powerful than anything they possessed. But that would reveal too much, too soon. He needed to control the narrative, to reveal his power on his own terms. He gave a slight shake of his head. My apologies, Lord Hashirama. The attack on my caravan. All of my scrolls and supplies were lost. I have only my basic skills to offer. He bowed his head in a show of humility. Tobirama scoffed audibly. As expected. Useless. Enough, Butsuma commanded. The plan is set. Take your positions. We attack in 1 hour. As the captains dispersed to brief their units, Naruto found a spot under a large oak tree. He closed his eyes, feigning meditation, but in reality, he was expanding his senses. Not his chakra sense, but his sage mode sense, the connection to the world itself. He could feel the life force of every tree, every insect, every blade of grass. And he could feel the A clan. They were a crackling bonfire of energy in the valley below. Their chakra was sharp, agitated, like the air before a lightning strike. It was aggressive and powerful, with none of the fluid adaptability of the Senju's chakra. Hashirama was right. They were a thunderstorm. But Naruto could feel something else, too. A weakness. Their power was channeled outwards, a brilliant, blinding display. But their control, their inner focus, was lacking. Their lightning release armor was a shell. A powerful shell, to be sure, but a shell nonetheless. If you can't break the shell, Naruto thought to himself, a plan beginning to form, you just have to hit it with something that rattles what's inside. He opened his eyes. Hashirama was looking at him, an unspoken question on his face. Naruto gave him a thumbs up and a wide, confident grin. Hashirama blinked, momentarily taken aback, before a slow smile spread across his own face. For the first time that day, the future god of shinobi looked a little less worried. The battle began with a roar. Butsuma's main force descended into the valley, a wave of dark blue and red armor crashing against the A clan's line. The I were clad in lighter, white and gold armor, and their bodies were already crackling with visible blue electricity. The clash was immediate and brutal. Shouts and screams filled the air, the sickening sound of steel meeting flesh mingling with the crackle of lightning and the hiss of water jutsu. It was chaos. Naruto, placed in the center of the Senju formation, found himself in the thick of it. An A warrior, his hair standing on end and his eyes wide with battle lust, charged him. Die, Senju scum, he roared, his fist wreathed in lightning. Naruto moved on pure instinct. He sidestepped the punch, the lightning scorching the air where his head had been. He ducked under a wild swing, brought his leg around, and swept the man's feet out from under him. As the warrior fell, Naruto brought the heel of his palm down in a precise, non-lethal strike to the man's temple. The A warrior went limp. Naruto didn't have time to breathe. 2 more took the first one's place. He moved like a dancer through the chaos, a whirlwind of dodges, parries, and precise taijutsu strikes. He used no jutsu, revealed no special abilities. He was just a leaf in the wind, untouchable, yet every person who attacked him ended up unconscious on the ground. The Senju around him started to notice. They were fighting for their lives, using powerful water-style jutsu to counter the Ai's lightning, but this strange blonde man was handling his opponents with an efficiency that was both baffling and awe-inspiring. Who is this guy? One of the Senju gasped, after Naruto effortlessly disabled 3 A clansmen who had broken through their line. From a vantage point on the battlefield, Butsuma watched with narrowed eyes. He was locked in a deadly duel with Hiraishin the Swift, the A commander, a giant of a man whose every move was like a thunderclap. Butsuma was a master warrior, his swordplay deflecting Hiraishin's lightning-infused attacks, but he couldn't break through the man's defenses. Even so, his attention was split. He saw Naruto moving through the battle, a calm eye in the heart of the storm. He wasn't fighting like a Senju. He wasn't fighting like an Uzumaki. He was fighting like nothing Butsuma had ever seen before. Meanwhile, on the western flank, Tobirama's unit had engaged the enemy. They were a scalpel, cutting through the A clan's ranks, heading for the command tent. Tobirama was a whirlwind of motion, his water jutsu flowing from one to the next without a single wasted movement. Water style, water dragon jutsu, he yelled, weaving a complex series of hand signs. A massive serpent of water rose from the ground, crashing into a group of A guards. But the I were prepared. A tall, powerfully built young man, no older than Naruto, stepped forward. He had the same sharp features as Hiraishin and wore a more ornate version of the A armor. This was Denko, Hiraishin's son and heir. You're the clan leader's son, aren't you? Denko grinned, his body erupting in a violent aura of lightning. Let's see if the Senju prodigy can handle the future clan leader. He moved. It wasn't a run, it was an explosion. He was a blur of blue electricity, appearing right in front of Tobirama, his fist aimed at the young Senju's face. Tobirama's genius-level reflexes saved him. He substituted with a log at the last possible second, appearing a few feet away, his heart hammering in his chest. The speed was incredible. Far greater than anyone he had ever faced. "You're fast," Tobirama acknowledged, his expression grim. But speed is useless without precision. He clapped his hands together. Water style, water wall. A vortex of water erupted around him, forming a swirling defensive barrier. Denko just laughed. "A wall? I am the storm that breaks the wall." He slammed his fist into the water barrier. The lightning from his armor supercharged the attack, and the water wall exploded outwards in a shower of superheated steam. Tobirama was blown back, skidding across the ground. He landed on his feet, but he was breathing heavily. His water was a natural conductor for Denko's lightning. It was a terrible elemental matchup. Denko pressed his advantage, relentless. He was a constant barrage of lightning-fast attacks. Tobirama was forced onto the defensive, using his wits and his speed to dodge and parry, but he couldn't find an opening. He was being overwhelmed. One of Denko's attacks finally connected. A lightning-charged kick caught Tobirama in the side, shattering his armor plating and sending him flying into a tree. Tobirama slumped to the ground, gasping for air, his side screaming in agony. Denko walked towards him slowly, his fist crackling with enough lightning to power a small city. "It's over, Senju. You were a worthy opponent, for a child. But you are no match for the thunder of the A-clan." Tobirama gritted his teeth, trying to push himself up, but his body wouldn't respond. He looked up at the crackling fist descending towards him and, for the first time in his life, felt the cold certainty of his own death. And then, a flash of yellow. Naruto appeared between them as if from nowhere. He hadn't been running. One moment he was in the main battle, the next he was here, standing over Tobirama's fallen form, his back to the young Senju. "Get away from him," Naruto said, his voice dangerously quiet. Denko halted, surprised by the sudden appearance. He sneered. "And who are you? The Senju's pet? Get out of my way, or I'll turn you to ash along with him." "I said," Naruto repeated, his head tilting up slowly, "get away." The world seemed to fall silent. The air grew heavy, thick with an energy that was ancient and powerful. The Senju and A fighting nearby stopped, their instincts screaming at them. A pressure, immense and primal, settled over the battlefield. Naruto closed his eyes. He drew in a breath, and with it, drew upon the natural energy of the world. It flooded into him, a pure, powerful torrent he had kept dammed up for weeks. When he opened his eyes again, the orange pigmentation of perfect sage mode surrounded them. Denko took an involuntary step back. "What? What is that? What are you?" Tobirama, lying on the ground, stared in utter disbelief. "The chakra. It wasn't chakra. It was something else. It was the life force of the world itself, focused into a single being." The faint, dark echo he had sensed from Naruto before was gone, completely overshadowed by this new, immense power that felt as natural and as terrifying as a mountain coming to life. "Me?" Naruto said, a small, dangerous smile touching his lips. "I'm just a wandering Uzumaki." He moved. It wasn't the explosive, straightforward speed of Denko. It was a fluid, unpredictable motion, like a leaf on the wind. He vanished. He reappeared behind Denko, his hand formed into a claw aimed at the heir's neck. Denko spun around, his lightning armor flaring, but Naruto was gone again. "What is this trickery?" Denko roared, spinning around, trying to find his target. Multi-shadow clone jutsu. An explosion of smoke, and the clearing was filled. Not with 10 or 20 clones. With 200. 200 identical, sage-marked Narutos, all with the same calm, determined expression. The entire battlefield, from Butsuma's position to the rearguard, fell silent. The fighting stopped completely. Everyone, Senju and A alike, stared at the impossible sight. 200 perfect clones. It was a jutsu that should have killed anyone who attempted it, draining their chakra in an instant. Tobirama's mind reeled. He's not using his own chakra for this. He's using the world's. He's drawing on an infinite source. The Naruto clones didn't just attack wildly. They moved with a terrifying synchronicity. One group threw kunai to divert Denko's attention. Another group attacked from below, forcing him to leap into the air. A third group was waiting for him, their hands swirling with a spiraling ball of pure, blue chakra. Rasengan. They all yelled in unison. Denko, trapped in mid-air, crossed his arms in front of him, his lightning armor flaring to its maximum output. I will not be defeated by such parlor tricks. A dozen Rasengan slammed into his defensive shell. The impact was colossal. The lightning armor held, but the kinetic force of the attack was incredible. Denko was sent flying, crashing through several trees before slamming into the side of a cliff face, his armor flickering and sputtering. He staggered to his feet, bleeding from a cut on his forehead. Impossible, he gasped. What is that jutsu? The original Naruto stood before him, his expression unreadable. You're tough. I'll give you that. He held up his right hand, and a new Rasengan formed, but this one was different. It grew larger, and 4 massive points extended from the sphere, spinning with incredible velocity. A high-pitched, piercing scream filled the air, like 1,000 birds shrieking at once. It was a sound that grated on the soul. Let's see if your armor can handle this, Naruto said, his voice flat. Wind style, Rasen Shuriken. He threw it. The spinning blade of wind flew through the air, cutting a trench in the ground as it went. It grew larger, more violent, a miniature hurricane of death. Denko's eyes widened in terror. He tried to dodge, but he was too slow, too injured. The Rasen Shuriken slammed into him. In a final, desperate act of self-preservation, Denko thrust his right arm forward, his lightning armor flaring around it in a concentrated shield. The Rasen Shuriken hit the makeshift shield and there was no grand explosion. There was only a brief, silent sphere of white light and wind. The sound of the jutsu vanished as it imploded, and when the light faded, the result was horrific. Denko's right arm was gone, completely disintegrated from the elbow down. The rest of his armor had been shredded, his body covered in millions of microscopic cuts. He stared in shock at the stump where his hand used to be, his mind unable to process the loss, before his eyes rolled back in his head and he collapsed, unconscious. Silence. Absolute, profound silence descended upon the valley. Every single shinobi, friend and foe, stared at the spot where Denko had fallen, then at the lone, blonde-haired man standing calmly amidst the carnage. The A-clan stared in horror. Their champion, their invincible heir, had been defeated in seconds by a power they couldn't even comprehend. Hiraishin, who had been locked in combat with Butsuma, let his lightning armor die, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. Denko, he roared in anguish. The spell was broken. The A-clan's morale shattered completely. For them, it was like watching a force of nature, a god of the battlefield, descend and pass judgment. They broke. They turned and fled, carrying their wounded, their disciplined ranks dissolving into a panicked mob. They didn't even look back. The Senju didn't pursue. They were just as stunned. They stared at Naruto, who let his sage mode recede, the orange markings fading from his eyes. He stood there, breathing a little heavily, but otherwise unharmed. Butsuma Senju lowered his sword, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. Clones that fought with strategy. A jutsu of pure, rotating chakra with no hand signs. A wind-style attack that seemed to destroy on a level he didn't know was possible. And the transformation. That terrifying, sage-like power. Hashirama ran to Naruto's side, his face a mixture of awe, relief, and boundless joy. Naruto. You were incredible. What was that? How did you do that? Naruto just gave him a tired grin. A few tricks my master taught me. He walked over to where Tobirama was still lying on the ground. He knelt and offered a hand. You okay? Tobirama stared at the offered hand, then up at Naruto's face. He didn't take it. He pushed himself up on his own, wincing in pain. His expression was a storm of conflicting emotions. He had been saved. His life had been in the hands of the man he had called a spy, a threat, a variable. He owed this stranger his life. But the power he had witnessed. It was not the power of a man. It was something else entirely. It was a power that could build villages or destroy them. His suspicion hadn't vanished. It had been transformed into a new, far more potent emotion, fear. I am fine, Tobirama said stiffly, avoiding Naruto's gaze. Your intervention was adequate. Naruto chuckled, knowing it was the closest he would ever get to a thank you from the young prodigy. He stood up and looked around at the silent, staring Senju warriors. Their expressions were no longer just suspicious. Now, they were filled with a deep, primal awe, and a healthy dose of terror. He was no longer just a stranger. He was an enigma, a monster, a savior. The long journey back to the compound was the complete opposite of the march to battle. A wide circle of silence surrounded Naruto. No one spoke to him. No one looked him directly in the eye. They would glance at him, then quickly look away, as if they were afraid to draw his attention. The guard who had been assigned to him now trailed a dozen paces behind, Like an acolyte following a god. He was no longer the outsider. He was something far more complicated. That night, back in the compound, he was not taken to his cell. He was escorted to the main hall, the same room where he had been judged just a day before. Butsuma Senju sat at the head of the table. Hashirama and Tobirama stood at his side. The clan elders were present, their faces grim. It was not an interrogation of a prisoner. It was a council of war with a newly discovered weapon of mass destruction. Butsuma looked at Naruto, his eyes holding a new, calculating light. The A clan has been routed. You saved my son's life. You saved this clan from a devastating defeat. For that, you have my gratitude. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. Now, you will tell me exactly what you are. Chapter 3, The Weight of Power. The air in the Senju clan's main hall was thick enough to taste. It was a stifling brew of fear, suspicion, and the sharp, metallic scent of ozone that still seemed to cling to Naruto's clothes. He stood in the center of the room, the focal point of a dozen pairs of hard, analytical eyes. The clan elders, men with faces like ancient trees, etched with the scars of 100 battles, sat flanking their leader. They looked at Naruto not as a boy, but as a typhoon that had inexplicably veered at the last second to save their village instead of leveling it. Gratitude was a luxury they couldn't afford. What they felt was profound, unnerving shock. He was not in his cell. He had not been disarmed. But this was no honor. This was the wariness one shows a wild, powerful beast that has, for the moment, decided not to eat you. Butsuma Senju sat at the head of the table, his posture unyielding, his hands clasped before him. His gaze was a physical weight, pinning Naruto in place. At his right stood Hashirama, his expression a mixture of pride in his friend and anxiety for what was to come. At his left was Tobirama, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his face a mask of cold fury and unwilling death. His armor was gone, replaced by a simple blue kimono, but the livid purple bruise blooming on his side, visible where the cloth was slightly displaced, was a stark reminder of how close he had come to death. A reminder of who had saved him. The A clan has been routed, Butsuma Senju said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the wooden floorboards. It was a statement of fact, devoid of triumph. You saved my son's life. You saved this clan from a devastating defeat. For that, he paused, the words precise and measured, you have my gratitude. Naruto inclined his head slightly. I only did what was right. Did you? Butsuma countered, his eyes narrowing. Or did you simply reveal your true power when you had no other choice? The power you have kept hidden since your arrival. He leaned forward, the full force of his authority washing over Naruto. The pleasantries are over. The debt for my son's life is acknowledged. But the debt this clan owes its own security is greater. We will have answers. No more stories of wandering caravans. No more convenient amnesia. You will tell me exactly what you are. The question hung in the air, sharp and heavy as a guillotine. What are you? Not who. Naruto met the clan leader's gaze. He had anticipated this. He had played his hand on the battlefield, and now he had to play the one in this room. He needed to build a new lie, a better one, anchored in just enough truth to be unshakable. I am what I told you I was, Naruto began, his voice calm and steady, projecting a confidence he didn't entirely feel. I am Naruto Uzumaki. Of the Uzumaki clan. That is a clan name, not an explanation. An elder with a heavily scarred face snapped, his hand gripping the hilt of his sword. No Uzumaki in living memory has ever wielded such power. That sage transformation. It is unnatural. Demonic. My power is rare, Naruto conceded, turning his gaze to the elder. But it is not demonic. It is Senjutsu. Sage arts. It is the art of becoming one with the natural energy of the world itself. Tobirama let out a short, sharp scoff. Senjutsu. A convenient, esoteric name for a power you have demonstrated a mastery of that surpasses anyone in recorded history. Where did you learn it? Who was your master? This was the attack Naruto had been waiting for. Tobirama, the logician, the analyst, was trying to pick apart the foundation of his story. My master was a man named Jiraiya, Naruto said, the name tasting like ash and memory in his mouth. He poured real grief into his expression, a pain that was all too easy to access. He was one of the Sannin, the three great wandering sages. He found me when I was a boy, an orphan from a branch of the Uzumaki that had long since been scattered. He saw a potential in me to handle the rigors of his training. Jiraiya? Sannin? Tobirama pressed, his eyes narrowing. I have access to the Senju archives. There is no record of any such man, or any such title. There wouldn't be, Naruto replied smoothly. He was not a man who sought fame. He was a wanderer, a hermit. His name would not be in any official records. He believed the path of the sage was a solitary one. He is dead now. He died before the attack that brought me here. He had created a ghost, a legend impossible to verify. It was a thin shield, but it was all he had. Hashirama seized the opportunity to intervene. Father. Elders. Does it matter who his master was? Look at what he did. He used his power to defend us. He saved Tobirama. He saved me when we first found him. His actions are those of an ally. His actions are those of a being with immense power who chose, for his own reasons, to side with us in a single battle. Tobirama shot back, his voice rising with passion for the first time. What happens in the next battle? What happens when his mysterious motivations no longer align with our own? This power is a threat. It unbalances the world. To leave it unexplained, to simply trust it, is the height of foolishness. And what would you have us do, Tobirama? Hashirama challenged, stepping forward. Kill him? The man who just saved your life? Is that the honor of the Senju clan? The two brothers stared each other down, a clash of ideology, of idealism versus pragmatism, the defining conflict of their generation playing out in miniature before Naruto's eyes. Enough. Butsuma's voice cracked like a whip, and his sons fell silent. He turned his unblinking gaze back to Naruto. The jutsu you used. The clones. They were not illusions. They were solid. They fought. They thought. No man has the chakra to create 200 such copies of himself. It is a unique application of the senjutsu I learned, Naruto explained, carefully editing the truth. The clones are taxing, but sage mode allows me to draw on natural energy to lessen the burden on my own reserves. As for the spiraling sphere of chakra, the Rasengan, Tobirama supplied, the name sounding like a scientific classification on his tongue. Yes. And the wind version. The Rasenshuriken, Naruto confirmed, deciding it was better to name them himself. They are my own creations. Jutsu I developed based on my master's teachings. He was taking ownership of them. It was a risk, branding himself as a genius on par with Tobirama, but it was more believable than claiming his dead, unverifiable master had taught him everything. It also explained why no one else knew the techniques. The elders murmured amongst themselves, their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief. A boy who could invent S-rank jutsu? It was nearly as unbelievable as the rest of his story. But they had seen the results. They had seen the mangled, unconscious form of Denko-A being carried from the field by his routed clansmen. Butsumo was silent for a long, heavy minute, his fingers steepled before him. He was weighing the variables. A weapon of untold power. A story full of holes but impossible to definitively disprove. An action that had unequivocally saved his clan. He was a pragmatist above all else. And pragmatism dictated one path. Your story is insufficient, Butsumo stated finally. It answers little and asks more questions. However, your power is undeniable. And for now, it has been used in service to the Senju. He rose to his feet, his presence filling the room. Therefore, your status changes. You are no longer a prisoner. But you are not a guest. You will be considered a special asset of the Senju clan. A ward, under my direct authority. You will be given proper quarters, access to our training facilities, and the freedom of this compound. You will no longer perform menial labor. Hashirama's face lit up with relief. However, Butsumo continued, his gaze hardening, you will not leave this compound without my express permission. And you will be assigned a handler. Someone to observe you, to learn from you, and to ensure your unique talents are integrated properly into our clan structure. He turned his gaze to his younger son. Tobirama. This will be your responsibility. You will spend time with him every day. Spar with him. Learn what he knows. And report everything, back to me. Tobirama's eyes widened slightly. He looked from his father to Naruto, a complex storm of emotions warring on his face, resentment, duty, suspicion, and a flicker of something else, a grudging, intellectual curiosity. It was a punishment and an opportunity all in one. He gave a stiff, formal bow. As you command, father. Finally, Butsumo said, his eyes locking with Naruto's once more. This claim of your Uzumaki heritage. It is the only part of your story we can verify. A formal envoy will be dispatched to Whirlpool at once. They will carry a message, asking the Uzumaki clan to confirm the existence of your wandering branch and your identity. When their reply comes, we will have our truth. One way or another. The unspoken threat was clear. If they do not know you, you are a liar. And I will deal with you. I understand, Naruto said, his heart pounding. He had just bought himself time. Weeks, maybe months. But the clock was now officially ticking. The council is dismissed, Butsuma declared. Naruto, you are free to go. A clansman will show you to your new quarters. As the elders filed out of the room, their faces grim and thoughtful, Hashirama rushed over to Naruto, slapping him on the back with a force that would have winded a normal person. You did it. See? I told you my father was a man of reason. He beamed. He's a man who knows a valuable weapon when he sees one, Tobirama muttered under his breath as he walked past them, not sparing Naruto a glance. Naruto watched him go, a small smile playing on his lips. He had survived. He had a new, precarious position. And he had just been shackled to the one person in the world who was most determined to see him fail. This, he thought, was going to be interesting. The days that followed were a surreal adjustment. Naruto was moved from his windowless cell to a small but clean room in the main barracks, one usually reserved for high-ranking shinobi. It had a real bed, a window that overlooked the training grounds, and a door that locked from the inside. To Naruto, it felt like a palace. The reaction of the clan was a tangible thing. The fear was still there, a low-level hum beneath the surface of every interaction. But it was now mixed with a deep, pervasive awe. When he walked through the compound, conversations didn't just stop, they were replaced by a respectful, wary silence. Warriors who had ignored him for weeks would now give him a curt, formal nod. Children would point and whisper his name, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and hero worship. One afternoon, a small girl, no older than 7, bravely approached him while he was watching the clouds. Are you the Rasengan-sama? She asked, her voice a tiny squeak. Naruto blinked, then broke into a wide grin. No. Just Naruto. He knelt down to her level. What's your name? Yuriko, she whispered. Her mother rushed over, her face pale with panic, and began bowing repeatedly. My deepest apologies, Naruto Dono. She is young, she meant no disrespect. Hey, it's okay, Naruto said gently, raising a hand. She wasn't being disrespectful at all. He looked at the little girl and, with a quick flicker of chakra, performed a simple transformation, his face briefly taking on the comical, whiskered features of a cartoon fox. The girl gasped, then giggled, her fear forgotten. Her mother just stared, her mouth agape, before slowly, hesitantly, a small smile touched her own lips. The moment was a small victory, but it felt more significant than the entire battle with the eye. Tobirama, true to his father's command, appeared the next day at dawn. Training Ground 7, he said, his tone flat and clipped. Now. Training Ground 7 was a secluded clearing surrounded by massive, ancient trees. Tobirama stood in the center, his arms crossed. He had shed his formal kimono for practical training gear. My father has ordered me to learn from you, Tobirama stated, his voice devoid of any warmth. I will comply with his orders. But do not mistake this for friendship. I still believe you are a threat. Your power is an anomaly that destabilizes everything. I will understand it. I will dissect it. And if I find any hint of deception or malice, I will eliminate you. The debt for my life has been acknowledged. It has not been paid. Naruto just shrugged, a disarming smile on his face. Sure thing. So, what do you want to learn first? How to make 200 clones? Or the giant spinning ball of death? A vein pulsed in Tobirama's temple. We will begin with taijutsu. I wish to assess your basic combat capabilities without your parlor tricks. Alright, Naruto agreed easily, settling into a loose, relaxed stance. Your move. Tobirama didn't hesitate. He exploded forward, his speed still incredible, his movements precise and deadly. He launched a series of swift, brutal strikes aimed at Naruto's vitals. It was the Senju's aggressive, powerful fighting style, designed to overwhelm and crush an opponent. For Naruto, it was like watching the world in slow motion. He didn't attack. He simply moved. He swayed left, letting a knife hand strike whistle past his ear. He dipped down, a vicious kick sailing over his head. He used the back of his hand to redirect a punch, spinning with the momentum and ending up behind Tobirama. Every move the Senju prodigy made was perfectly countered, not with force, but with the path of least resistance. It was the fluid, adaptable style of a master who had faced 1,000 different opponents and learned from every single one. Tobirama grew more and more frustrated. He was faster, he was using all of his skill, but he couldn't land a single blow. It was like trying to punch water. Naruto wasn't even breathing hard. You're relying too much on aggression, Naruto said calmly, catching Tobirama's wrist in a gentle but unbreakable grip. You telegraph your moves. You put all your power into the strike itself, but you neglect the setup. Your form is perfect, but your flow is rigid. He pushed, and Tobirama, caught off balance, stumbled back. For the first time, a flicker of genuine shock broke through his cold composure. Naruto hadn't overpowered him. He had outthought him. How? Tobirama demanded, his chest heaving. Experience, Naruto said simply. He relaxed his stance. You're a genius, Tobirama. Probably the smartest person I've ever met. You see jutsu and you understand it. But battle isn't a formula. It's a conversation. And right now, you're just shouting. He paused, then decided to throw the prodigy a bone, a seed of an idea. Your water style is incredible. But have you ever considered its nature beyond just being water? Have you ever tried to change its quality? Make it stickier, like syrup? Or sharper, like a blade? Tobirama stared at him, his red eyes wide. Chakra nature and shape transformation. They were incredibly high-level concepts, theories that most shinobi never even considered. And this blonde enigma was talking about them as if they were basic fundamentals. That is enough for today, Tobirama said stiffly, turning away to hide the rampant curiosity on his face. We will continue tomorrow. As he walked away, Naruto knew he had planted a hook. Suspicion was a powerful motivator. But for a mind like Tobirama's, curiosity was even stronger. That evening, Naruto found a quiet spot on the roof of his barracks, looking out over the compound. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, reminding him of home. Of Ichiraku ramen. Of the faces of his friends. A profound sense of loneliness washed over him. He had a place here, for now. But he was an island, a man out of time, and the weight of the future he knew, the future he had to prevent, rested squarely on his shoulders. He closed his eyes and sank into his mindscape. It was still dark and quiet, but the air felt a little less stagnant. He approached the great gate and saw Kurama, still coiled in his deep slumber. But there was a change. One of the fox's massive, fiery tails gave a slow, sleepy twitch. Hey, Kurama, Naruto whispered into the silence. You waking up in there? You missed a hell of a fight. I met the Senju. All of them. Hashirama's just like I imagined. And Tobirama. Man, you'd hate him. He's even more of a stick in the mud than you are. He sat down before the gate, leaning his head back against the cold bars. I'm in, Kurama. I have a place. But it's hard. I have to lie to everyone, all the time. I have to pretend I'm not me. But I think I can do this. I have to. For them. For everyone. The sleeping fox didn't stir, but Naruto felt a faint, almost imperceptible warmth spread through the seal. It was enough. Naruto? He opened his eyes. Hashirama was standing there, holding 2 steaming bowls of rice. He offered one to Naruto with a wide grin. Thought you might be hungry, he said, sitting down beside him. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last vestiges of light fade from the sky. My father, Hashirama said suddenly, his voice quiet. He sent the hawk this afternoon. The message to the Uzumaki clan. Naruto nodded, his stomach tightening slightly. I know. I hope they reply soon, Hashirama continued, looking out at the darkening forest. I hope they confirm everything you said. Not because I don't believe you. I do. But because. It would make things easier, he sighed, a sound heavy with a weariness that didn't belong on a 12-year-old's shoulders. We lost 6 men in that battle, Naruto. 6. It was a victory, but it doesn't feel like one. It never does. My other brothers. Itama, Kawarama. They died in battles just like this one. For a patch of land. For pride. He looked at Naruto, his dark eyes shining with a desperate, passionate light. There has to be another way. A place where we don't have to send children to die. A place where people from different clans can sit down, eat rice together, and not worry about a knife in the back. That's my dream, Naruto. Naruto listened, his heart aching for the young man beside him. This was the Hashirama from the stories, the idealist who dreamed of peace in a world that knew only war. It's a good dream, Hashirama, Naruto said softly. It's the only dream worth having. But is it possible? Hashirama asked, his voice barely a whisper. Madara. My friend. He started to think it's impossible. That peace is a fool's hope. It's not, Naruto said, his own voice filled with a conviction born of seeing that dream realized, and then seeing it almost lost. It's the hardest thing in the world. It's harder than fighting, harder than any jutsu. But it's possible. You just can't give up on it. Ever. Hashirama stared at him, a sense of wonder on his face. It was as if Naruto was speaking a language only his soul could understand. "Thank you, Naruto," he said, his voice thick with emotion. They sat there for a long time, two boys against the backdrop of a world at war, one dreaming of the future, the other haunted by it. Miles away, in a compound just as fortified but shrouded in an aura of cold, controlled pride, a different meeting was taking place. An Uchiha scout, his face pale with exertion, knelt before his clan leader, Tajima Uchiha. They were routed completely, Lord Tajima, the scout reported, his voice strained. The A-clan fled. Their champion, Denko, was grievously wounded. Tajima Uchiha, a stern man with the harsh lines of a lifelong warrior, stroked his goatee. The Senju are strong, but the Eye's lightning armor has always been a difficult counter. How did Butsuma manage such a decisive victory? It was not Lord Butsuma, my lord, the scout hesitated. It was one man. A newcomer among the Senju. They say he is blonde. Like a demon. They say he created an army out of thin air. They say he wields the wind itself as a blade that can disintegrate a man on a level we cannot comprehend. In the shadows near the back of the hall, a young figure stiffened. Madara Uchiha stepped forward into the flickering torchlight, his Sharingan spinning to life, not out of aggression, but out of sheer, soul-shaking shock. Blonde. An army of clones. A wind blade. It couldn't be. The strange, half-drowned man from the river. The wandering Uzumaki. Tajima looked at his son. Madara. You have been quiet since your last report. Does this news mean something to you? Madara's face was a mask of stone, betraying nothing of the maelstrom in his mind. The man he had dismissed as a probable spy, the man he had allowed his rival to take in, was not just a variable. He was a force of nature. A power that had just single-handedly altered the strategic landscape of the entire Land of Fire. And he was living in the home of his greatest enemy, his dearest friend. His fists clenched at his sides, his knuckles white. The world had just tilted on its axis, and he was standing right on the fault line. Anomaly in axis. The truce between Naruto and his newfound handler was as thin and as sharp as a shard of ice. Every dawn, Tobirama would appear at his door, his face a mask of cold duty, and escort him to Training Ground 7. Their sessions became the most talked about, yet unseen, spectacle in the Senju compound. The guards posted at a respectful distance would only ever report the same thing: the thud of bodies hitting the dirt, the sharp crack of redirected strikes, and the increasingly frustrated yells of their clan's prodigious young leader. To Tobirama, it was maddening. He was a genius, a prodigy spoken of in hushed, reverent tones by his clansmen. He could deconstruct a jutsu by seeing it once, formulate a battle strategy in the space of a few heartbeats, and wield water with a lethality that defied his age. Yet, against Naruto in pure taijutsu, he was a child flailing in the dark. Again. Tobirama snarled, launching himself forward. He had changed his tactics. Instead of pure aggression, he was now trying to be unpredictable, mixing feints with powerful, direct strikes, leaving no discernible pattern. It didn't matter. Naruto moved with a preternatural calm, his body flowing around the attacks. He would deflect a punch with his forearm, use the momentum to spin inside Tobirama's guard, and tap him lightly on the back of the knee, causing the younger boy to stumble. He never struck back with force. He simply dismantled Tobirama's offense piece by piece, revealing its flaws with an infuriating ease. "You're thinking too hard," Naruto commented, sidestepping a sweeping kick and lightly pushing Tobirama's shoulder, sending him spinning off balance. "You're trying to find a formula to beat me. There isn't one. You need to stop predicting and start reacting. Feel the flow of the battle. Do not lecture me," Tobirama snapped, landing awkwardly before turning, his red eyes burning with a frustrated fire. "Your movements are illogical. They defy standard combat principles. The only principle in a fight is that you're still standing at the end of it," Naruto retorted with a grin. "Everything else is just theory." He gestured for Tobirama to come at him again. "You want to learn something useful today? Forget trying to hit me. For the next hour, I just want you to try and touch the leaf tied to my back." He turned, revealing a single, large maple leaf tied loosely to the back of his belt. It was a simple training exercise, one he remembered from his own academy days, but for someone as proud and offense-oriented as Tobirama, it was a fundamental rewiring of his combat instincts. It forced him to focus not on destruction, but on precision, speed, and misdirection. For an hour, the clearing was filled with the sound of Tobirama's increasingly desperate lunges and Naruto's easy laughter. The prodigy used his speed, his substitutions, everything in his arsenal, but Naruto was always one step ahead, the leaf fluttering just out of his grasp. Finally, drenched in sweat and panting from exertion, Tobirama fell to his knees, defeated. It's impossible, he gasped. Nah, it's not, Naruto said, untying the leaf and offering it to him. You almost got it a few times. When you stopped thinking about it and just moved. That's the key. Tobirama stared at the leaf in Naruto's hand, then up at his smiling face. This man, this anomaly, was effortlessly teaching him lessons that years of clan training and battlefield experience never had. The scientist in him was beginning to eclipse the soldier. The suspicion was still there, a cold, hard knot in his gut, but it was now wrapped in a thick layer of insatiable curiosity. He had to understand how Naruto worked. He had to. Their lessons weren't confined to taijutsu. As Butsuma had commanded, Tobirama began to probe the depths of Naruto's knowledge. He would bring scrolls on jutsu theory, on chakra control, on medical ninjutsu, and question Naruto relentlessly. The Rasengan, Tobirama said one afternoon, sitting across from Naruto in the Senju library, a rare privilege Naruto had been granted. It is the pinnacle of shape transformation. No hand signs. Pure, condensed, rotating chakra. The level of control required should be impossible. How? It's not about control in the way you think, Naruto tried to explain, remembering his own grueling training. It's not about forcing the chakra into a shape. It's about convincing it. You have to feel the flow, the spin, in every direction at once. It's more instinct than calculation. He created a Rasengan in his palm, the perfect, humming sphere, a testament to his mastery. My master said it was like trying to look left and right at the same time. Tobirama stared at the sphere, his analytical mind trying to reverse engineer the process. He then shifted his focus. The clone jutsu you used on the battlefield. It's unlike any clone I have ever witnessed or read about. Water or earth clones are mere puppets. Yours were solid. They fought independently. They dispersed into smoke when defeated, but not before taking real damage. They thought. To create a single, truly substantive clone should be impossible, let alone an army of them. It defies the very principles of chakra projection. What is that technique? I call it the shadow clone jutsu, Naruto said, giving the technique its name for the first time in this era. Standard clones are just chakra puppets, you're right. But this one creates a real, physical copy. The strain is immense. He leaned in, a conspiratorial glint in his eye. That's where the sage mode comes in, Naruto lied, reinforcing his cover story. Natural energy supplements my own chakra, acting as a buffer. It lets me handle the strain. He couldn't tell him the truth, that the Uzumaki's massive life force and chakra reserves made him uniquely suited for it. He couldn't tell him that for him, making a few hundred clones was as easy as breathing. And you invented these techniques? Tobirama pressed, his gaze sharp. A boy, alone, with only the guidance of a ghost for a master? A genius master, Naruto corrected with a sad smile. And a lot of trial and error. Mostly error. He let the Rasengan dissipate. Believe me, I've got the scars to prove it. The lie was a constant, exhausting weight. Every conversation was a minefield. But with every session, he felt the ice around Tobirama thawing, not into warmth, but into a grudging, intellectual respect. The younger Senju began to incorporate Naruto's advice into his own training. He spent hours by the river, not just creating water dragons, but manipulating small, intricate shapes, trying to change the water's properties, making it sharp and cutting, or thick and binding. Naruto had given him a new world of possibilities to explore, and Tobirama's ravenous intellect was devouring it. Hashirama, on the other hand, needed no such convincing. His friendship with Naruto was simple, uncomplicated, and deep. He would often drag Naruto away from his handler for sparring sessions of their own, though theirs were far more joyful and chaotic. Your taijutsu is amazing, Naruto. Hashirama would laugh, after Naruto had once again sent him tumbling head over heels with a simple redirection. But can it stand up to this? He would clap his hands together, and the ground would erupt with thick, woody roots, trying to ensnare Naruto. This was Hashirama's secret, the power he was only comfortable sharing with Naruto and Madara. Naruto would leap and dodge, marveling at the raw, untamed power of the Makuten. It was wild, uncontrolled, lashing out with pure instinct rather than refined skill. You're using too much force, Naruto yelled, dodging a massive wooden spike that shot up from the ground. It's like your chakra is overflowing. You need to guide it, not just unleash it. I don't know how. Hashirama admitted, panting as he tried to rein in the explosive growth. It just comes out. Then practice control, Naruto suggested, landing lightly on a branch. Forget making big attacks. Try to make something small. A single flower. Perfectly formed. Put all your focus into that. Hashirama looked at him, his eyes wide, then looked at his hands. A flower. A thing of creation, not destruction. The idea resonated with him on a fundamental level. He closed his eyes, his brow furrowed in concentration. A small tremor ran through the ground, and a single, lopsided, but vibrant camellia pushed its way through the earth. Hashirama stared at it, his face breaking into a smile of pure, unadulterated joy. It was in these moments that Naruto felt the most hope. He was making a difference. He was nurturing the two brothers who would define the future, pushing them towards the legends they were meant to become, hoping to sand down their sharpest, most self-destructive edges before they could cut the world too deeply. But for every moment of hope within the Senju compound, there was a growing storm outside of it. In the Uchiha compound, Madara was a ghost. He trained with a feverish intensity, his fire jutsu growing larger, more destructive. The news of the Senju's blonde demon had spread like wildfire through the clans. The Uchiha elders were demanding action, but Tajima, his father, was cautious. This new power was an unknown quantity, and he was not a man who gambled. "We need more information," Tajima declared in a war council. "Who is this man? Where did he come from? What are the limits of his power? We will not engage the Senju until we have these answers." The order infuriated Madara. It felt like cowardice. But he understood the logic. And it gave him an opportunity. He began to slip away from his clan's territory more often, his destination always the same, the Naka River. He didn't go to meet Hashirama anymore. He went to watch. Hidden in the trees on the Uchiha side of the river, his Sharingan active, he would observe the Senju compound from afar. He saw Naruto walking through the grounds, saw the strange mixture of fear and awe he inspired. He saw him training with Tobirama, effortlessly dominating the Senju prodigy. And he saw him laughing with Hashirama, a casual, easy camaraderie that sent a sharp, painful pang of jealousy through him. This Naruto was everything Madara was not. He was open, cheerful, and seemed to gather allies effortlessly, even among his enemies. And his power? It was immense, otherworldly. Madara had felt the dregs of it when he'd first found him. To hear that it had blossomed into something that could rout the A-clan single-handedly was a thought that both terrified and intrigued him. He had to know more. One evening, as the sun bled across the sky, Madara's patience wore thin. He saw Naruto leave the main compound and head towards the forest, alone. This was his chance. He moved like a shadow, crossing the river in a blur, his presence completely suppressed. Naruto was sitting on the roof of his barracks, just as he did most nights, watching the sunset. He felt the shift in the air a second before Madara landed silently behind him. He didn't tense, he didn't turn around. "The view's pretty good from up here," Naruto said calmly. "You can almost forget there's a war on." Madara stood there, his dark eyes boring into Naruto's back. His Sharingan was active, trying to see through the enigma, to peel back the layers of chakra and find the truth. But he saw nothing. Naruto's chakra was calm, placid, revealing none of the immense power the scouts had described. "Who are you?" Madara asked, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "And what are you doing with the Senju?" Naruto finally turned, his expression open and friendly, a stark contrast to the Uchiha's coiled intensity. "I'm Naruto. And they gave me a place to stay after my caravan was attacked." Seemed like the polite thing to do. "Do not play games with me," Madara snarled. "I was there at the river. I felt your power, what little was left of it. The scouts reports. The army of clones, the wind jutsu that disintegrates its targets. That is not the power of some random wandering Uzumaki. People are complicated," Naruto shrugged. "Got any rice crackers? I'm starving." Madara's fists clenched. The sheer nonchalance of the man was infuriating. "You are a threat to my clan. You are living with my enemies. By all rights, I should kill you where you sit." "You could try," Naruto said, his easy smile never wavering, but his blue eyes now held a glint of something hard and ancient. "But then Hashirama would be sad. And I don't think either of us wants that. Do we?" He had struck a nerve. The mention of Hashirama, the secret they shared, hung in the air between them. Madara's Sharingan spun, his gaze intense. He was searching for a weakness, an angle, but all he found was a calm, unshakable confidence. This man was not afraid of him. He was not afraid of the Uchiha. "What is your goal?" Madara asked, shifting his line of attack. "What do you hope to gain by siding with the Senju?" "Goal?" Naruto tilted his head. "I guess my goal is to not die. And maybe help my new friend achieve his dream so that kids don't have to kill each other over patches of dirt anymore. Seems like a pretty good goal, don't you think?" He was echoing Hashirama's own words, the very dream they had built together by the river. Madara felt a surge of anger, of possessiveness. That was their dream. You know nothing of that dream, Madara hissed. I know it's a good one, Naruto repeated softly. And I know Hashirama can't achieve it alone. He looked Madara directly in the eye, his gaze piercing. And neither can you. Before Madara could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed from below. Hashirama. Madara melted back into the shadows, his parting words a whispered promise. This isn't over. I will have the truth. Then he was gone. Hashirama appeared on the roof a moment later, 2 bowls of rice in his hands. Hey, Naruto. I thought you might be up here. Who were you talking to? Naruto took the offered bowl with a grin. Just thinking out loud. Thanks for the food. As they ate, Naruto knew that another piece had been placed on the board. He now stood not just between Hashirama and Tobirama, but between Hashirama and Madara. He was the anomaly that had been dropped into the middle of their axis, and the world was beginning to spin differently around him. The path to peace was still impossibly distant, but the first, most dangerous steps had been taken. And he was right in the middle of it all. Chapter 4, Echoes and Omens. The seasons began to turn, the fierce green of summer softening into the rust and gold of autumn. For Naruto, the Senju compound had transformed from a prison into a strange, gilded cage. He had freedom, but not liberty, he had respect, but not trust. He was an invaluable asset, a revered teacher, and a suspected monster, all at the same time. His life fell into a rhythm, dictated by the rising sun and the unyielding schedule of his handler. The morning sparring sessions with Tobirama had evolved. They were no longer simple lessons in taijutsu, they were complex, high-level workshops where the currency was innovation. Naruto, drawing on a lifetime of battle against a myriad of foes, would present Tobirama with problems the young genius had never conceived of. All right, today's lesson, Naruto announced one crisp morning, tossing a small stone into the air and catching it. Your water style is powerful, but it's loud. It has presence. Against a skilled sensor or a Sharingan user, they'll know what you're doing before the first drop of water even forms. Your task today, create a jutsu that is completely silent and invisible until the moment of impact. Tobirama's eyes, which now held more intellectual curiosity than outright hostility, widened slightly. An invisible attack? Water is, by its nature, visible. To make it invisible would require a complex light refraction jutsu layered on top of the initial technique. The chakra control would be astronomical. Or, Naruto countered, a sly grin on his face, you're thinking about it wrong. Don't make the water invisible. Make the attack invisible. Think smaller. Think sharper. He flicked his wrist, and a tiny, almost imperceptible needle of water shot from his fingertip, striking a tree 30 feet away with a soft thwip. It didn't do much damage, but it was incredibly fast, silent, and nearly impossible to see. Tobirama stared at the minuscule hole in the bark, his mind racing. The sheer precision, the micro-level shape transformation. It was a revelation. It wasn't about massive dragons and crushing waves, it was about turning a single drop of water into a killer's needle. It was a jutsu born from the mind of an assassin, not a soldier. How? How did you control it so finely? It's about the release point, Naruto explained. You're used to gathering chakra in your chest and releasing it through your hands and mouth. Big movements for big jutsu. Try focusing the chakra directly in your fingertip. A tiny, compressed, explosive release. It's not about power, it's about pressure. The concept was revolutionary. For the rest of the day, Tobirama stood by the river, his hand outstretched, sweat beading on his brow as he tried to master the technique. The first 100 attempts were failures, resulting in nothing more than weak squirts of water. But then, with a sharp intake of breath, a single, perfect needle of water shot from his index finger and pierced a floating leaf. A slow, triumphant smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a scientist who had just proven a new, world-changing theorem. Naruto had given him a new weapon, a new way of thinking, and the bond between them, though unspoken and unacknowledged, was being forged in the crucible of shared genius. Naruto's influence on Hashirama was just as profound, but far more emotional. He continued to encourage Hashirama's Makuten, helping him to see it not as a destructive force to be feared, but as an extension of his own gentle will. Their sessions were less about combat and more about creation. It's not working, Naruto. Hashirama groaned, slumping to the ground in frustration. He had been trying to create a detailed carving of a bird on a block of wood using his jutsu, but the result was a splintered, misshapen mess. I can make a forest, but I can't make a feather. That's because you're still treating it like a weapon, Naruto said, sitting beside him. You're telling the wood what to do. You're not asking it. He picked up a fallen leaf. When you use sage mode, what do you feel? Hashirama thought for a moment. I feel everything. The life in the trees, the buzz of the insects, the breath of the world. It's all connected. Exactly, Naruto said. Your wood style is the ultimate expression of that connection. It is life. So don't force it. Feel the shape of the bird in your mind, feel its life, and gently guide the wood to become it. Nurture it, like you would a seed. Hashirama closed his eyes, taking deep, calming breaths. He placed his hand on the block of wood. This time, there was no explosive surge of chakra. Instead, a gentle, warm energy flowed from his palm. The wood didn't splinter, it seemed to soften, to flow. Slowly, delicately, intricate shapes began to emerge from the surface, the curve of a wing, the detail of a single feather, the sharp point of a beak. In a few minutes, a perfect, lifelike wooden sparrow sat in his palm. Hashirama stared at it, tears welling up in his eyes. I did it. See? Naruto smiled. You're not just a warrior, Hashirama. You're an artist. Your power is meant to create beauty, not just destroy. This lesson resonated deeply within Hashirama, planting the seed of the philosophy that would one day define his reign as Hokage. He began to spend hours in the forest, not training for battle, but simply creating sculptures of animals, intricate wooden bridges over streams, shelters for small creatures. He was discovering the soul of his power, and in doing so, he was discovering himself. But while Naruto was nurturing the seeds of the future within the Senju compound, the world outside was reacting to the storm he had already unleashed. The Uchiha were growing restless. Tajima Uchiha, a deeply pragmatic man, saw the blonde demon as a terrifying new weapon in the Senju's arsenal, one that tipped the delicate balance of power. The more aggressive elders saw it as an unacceptable threat that had to be eliminated. Madara found himself caught in the middle. His rivalry with Hashirama was a fire in his soul, but it was a fire born of respect. This Naruto, however, was a different matter. He was an interloper, a mystery who had stolen his friend's attention and possessed a power that, for the first time in his life, made Madara feel inadequate. His pride, the core of his very being, could not abide it. His secret meetings with Naruto became more frequent, more intense. He would appear like a phantom on the rooftop, his Sharingan blazing. Your taijutsu, Madara said one night, his voice sharp. It is not the Senju's style. It is not Uzumaki. It is something else. Reactive, fluid. Where did it come from? You pick up things when you travel a lot, Naruto replied vaguely, not looking up from the moon. And your clones? Hashirama speaks of them constantly. He says you call them shadow clones. A jutsu that creates solid, thinking copies. He says Tobirama is obsessed with deciphering it. Tobirama needs a hobby, Naruto chuckled. Madara's patience snapped. He appeared in front of Naruto in a swirl of leaves, his face inches away, his Sharingan spinning with hypnotic intensity. I will not be toyed with. Every secret you possess is a weapon pointed at my family. My clan. Who are you? Naruto's easygoing demeanor vanished. His blue eyes became chips of ice. I'm the guy who is trying to keep your best friend from getting himself killed, Madara, he said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. I'm the guy who is teaching your future rival, Tobirama, how to be a better shinobi so he doesn't die in some pointless skirmish. I'm the guy who is helping Hashirama understand a power that could either save the world or drown it in trees. So I think the question is, who are you going to be? The man who helps him build his dream, or the man who stands in his way because of pride? The words hit Madara harder than any physical blow. Naruto wasn't just deflecting his questions, he was challenging his very identity, his bond with Hashirama. He was holding up a mirror, and Madara did not like the reflection. He vanished without another word, leaving Naruto alone on the rooftop, the weight of his manipulations settling heavily upon him. He hated the lies, the half-truths. But every word was a carefully placed stone on the path to a future where these brilliant, doomed souls might actually have a chance. His solitude was interrupted by a familiar, grating voice in the back of his mind. You're playing a dangerous game, kid. Naruto froze, his heart leaping into his throat. He plunged into his mindscape. The oppressive darkness was gone, replaced by the familiar, dim light of Kurama's cage. And standing there, his 9 tails swishing lazily, his massive red eye glaring down at him, was the fox himself. He was awake. Kurama, Naruto yelled, a grin of pure, unadulterated relief spreading across his face. You're awake. You lazy furball, I thought you were gonna sleep forever. Humph. The dimensional passage was taxing, Kurama grumbled, his voice a deep, rumbling bass. It seems my chakra was needed to stabilize your worthless body and prevent you from being torn apart. You should be more grateful. Grateful? I've been stuck here with a bunch of kids who are going to try and kill each other, trying not to screw up the entire timeline. A little help would have been nice. Kurama snorted, a plume of hot air washing over Naruto. I have been observing. Listening. This era. It stinks of blood and foolish pride. And these children. I know their chakra. The reincarnations of Indra and Ashura. You have placed yourself directly between them. I know, Naruto said, his smile fading. I have too. It's the only way. You are guiding them, Kurama noted, his eye narrowing. Teaching them. You are accelerating their growth. The Senju prodigy's water manipulation is already evolving beyond its original path. And the oaf with the wood. You are teaching him control he would not have learned for years. You are tampering with things you do not understand. I'm trying to save them. Naruto shot back. I'm trying to make them stronger, better, so they don't make the same mistakes. So Madara doesn't. He trailed off, the image of the masked man from his own time flashing in his mind. So he doesn't become the monster you knew? Kurama finished, his voice surprisingly soft. A noble sentiment. But a foolish one. The river of time has a strong current, kid. You may build a dam, but the water will always find a way through. By trying to prevent one tragedy, you may very well be creating a new one even worse than what you remember. The fox's words were a cold dose of reality. Naruto had been so focused on fixing the past, he hadn't considered the possibility of making it worse. Then what should I do? Naruto asked, his voice barely a whisper. Survive, Kurama said simply. For now, that is enough. And be prepared. The envoy to your clan was sent weeks ago. The hawk will return soon. And your house of lies will come crashing down. The reminder hit Naruto like a physical blow. The message to Whirlpool. He had almost forgotten. The day of reckoning was coming. It came sooner than he expected. A week later, a hawk was spotted on the horizon. Not a Senju messenger, but a bird from the coast, bearing the swirling red crest of the Uzumaki clan. The entire compound seemed to hold its breath. But Suma Senju summoned Naruto to the main hall. The elders were there. Hashirama and Tobirama were there. A Senju captain stood holding a single, sealed scroll. The reply from the Uzumaki has arrived, but Suma said, his voice flat, his face unreadable. He gestured, and the captain broke the seal and handed him the scroll. But Suma unrolled it, his eyes scanning the contents. The silence in the room was absolute. Naruto's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. The end of the line. The clan leader read the scroll, then read it again. A long, agonizing minute passed. Finally, he looked up, his gaze locking onto Naruto. It seems, but Suma said slowly, his voice laced with a confusion that was almost more unnerving than anger, that the Uzumaki clan has no record of a wandering branch. They have no knowledge of a man named Jiraiya. And they have never, ever, in their entire history, heard of an Uzumaki with the name Naruto. The air in the room turned to ice. Every eye was on him. Tobirama's face was a mask of cold, triumphant vindication. Hashirama looked utterly heartbroken, his belief crumbling before his eyes. However, but Suma continued, his eyes still fixed on Naruto, a deep frown on his face. The Uzumaki elder, a man named Ashina, writes something else. Something strange. He looked down at the scroll again. He says that while your name is unknown, the name you mentioned as a throwaway, the name of your ancestor, Namikaze, is not. He looked up, his eyes filled with a new, deeper level of suspicion. He says it is a name from an ancient Uzumaki prophecy. The name of a child who would one day be born of both Uzumaki and Senju blood, a child who would be tied to the fate of the Nine by Juu, and who would hold the power to either save the world or destroy it utterly. But Suma Senju lowered the scroll. So, I will ask you one more time, boy. Not what are you? But who are you? The prophesied child. The silence in the main hall was a living thing. It pressed in on Naruto from all sides, heavy with the weight of accusation and a new, terrifying awe. The words of the Uzumaki prophecy hung in the air, an omen that had just rewritten his entire existence in this era. He was no longer just a liar. He was a paradox, a walking contradiction confirmed by the very people who had exposed his deceit. Tobirama's face was a mask of cold, triumphant vindication, his earlier suspicion now vindicated and sharpened to a razor's edge. He knew the story was a lie, and this new development was, to his logical mind, merely a more elaborate, more dangerous fabrication. Hashirama, by contrast, looked utterly poleaxed. His belief in Naruto had been shattered by the first half of the scroll, only to be replaced by a profound, shell-shocked confusion. His friend wasn't who he said he was. But he might be something far, far more significant. Naruto's mind raced, his thoughts a chaotic whirlwind. He could feel Kurama stir within him, a low rumble of amusement and warning. The river of time has a strong current, kid. The fox's words echoed in his ears. His simple lie had been swept away, and in its place, the river had offered him a new, treacherous current to follow. He had no choice but to swim with it. He took a deep breath, forcing the frantic hammering of his heart to slow. He had to sell this. His life, and perhaps the future of this entire timeline, depended on it. He let his gaze fall to the floor, adopting an expression not of a cornered liar, but of a young man burdened by a terrible, secret weight. "You ask me who I am," Naruto said, his voice quiet but clear, resonating with a weariness that felt all too real. "The truth is, I don't fully know myself." He looked up, his blue eyes locking onto Butsuma's. "My story about the wandering caravan. It was a lie. I apologize for that deception. But it was a lie born of fear. Not fear for myself, but fear of what I carry inside me. Fear of what this prophecy means." He balled his hands into fists. "I never knew my parents. The first person I remember is my master, Jiraiya. He found me in the ruins of a village on the border of the Land of Fire, a place destroyed in some forgotten battle between clans. I was just a child. He told me he was a hermit, a sage who studied the whispers of the world. He said he was drawn to my location by a disturbance. A vast, dark chakra he could sense from miles away." Naruto placed a hand over his own stomach, over the seal that contained the nine-tailed fox. "He told me that I was a Jinchuriki. That one of the 9 Baijuu, the great-tailed beasts of legend, had been sealed inside me when I was an infant." A collective gasp went through the room. The elders leaned forward, their faces pale. The Baijuu were myths to most, terrifying bedtime stories used to frighten children. To know one was real, let alone contained within the boy standing before them, was a revelation that shook the foundations of their worldview. Tobirama's eyes widened, a flicker of understanding dawning on his face. The dark, hateful echo he had sensed. It all made sense now. It was the malevolent chakra of a tailed beast. "My master, Jiraiya, believed that I was the child from that prophecy," Naruto continued, his voice gaining strength as he wove the new narrative. "He didn't know how, or why. He said my existence was an anomaly. He trained me, taught me Senjutsu, because he believed it was the only power pure enough to control the beast within me, to keep its hatred from consuming me completely. He taught me to be a shinobi, not to serve a clan, but to be strong enough to bear my burden." He looked at Hashirama, whose heartbroken expression was slowly morphing into one of dawning empathy and awe. "The name. Namikaze. I mentioned it because it was a name Jiraiya muttered once when he was studying an ancient text. He never told me what it meant. Only that it was tied to my destiny." He let out a long, shuddering breath. "I lied to you because I didn't want you to look at me the way everyone else always has. With fear. As a monster. A weapon to be controlled. I just wanted a place to belong. I am sorry. However, I am an Uzumaki, and I will forever stand by that. That is one thing Jiraiya managed to figure out about my past." He bowed his head, a perfect picture of a tormented soul confessing his deepest secrets. It was a masterful performance, built on a bedrock of genuine emotion. The loneliness, the burden of being a Jinchuriki, the pain of his past, it was all real. He was just repurposing it. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer the silence of suspicion, but of contemplation. The elders murmured, their tones hushed. Butsuma Senju stared at Naruto, his face an unreadable mask, but his mind was calculating at a furious pace. A Jinchuriki. A child of prophecy. Linked to the Uzumaki and the Senju. This changed everything. Naruto was no longer a simple asset. He was a claim. A living, breathing claim to a destiny that could elevate the Senju clan to heights no one had ever dreamed of. Or, he was a time bomb that could obliterate them all. "The beast within you," Tobirama spoke, his voice sharp, cutting through the murmurs. "The 9 tails?" He guessed, his mind connecting the dots of ancient lore. Naruto met his gaze and nodded slowly. "The Kyubi no Yoko." The name landed with the force of a physical blow. "The 9 tails. The most powerful, most malevolent of all the Baijuu. The beast said to be capable of leveling mountains and raising tsunamis with a single sweep of its tails. And it was inside this boy." "Father," Hashirama said, his voice thick with emotion as he turned to Butsuma. "This changes nothing. Or rather, it changes everything, but in our favor. He is not a spy. He is one of us. The prophecy says he is of Uzumaki and Senju blood. He is kin. His burden is our burden. His burden is a threat that could incinerate this entire compound. Tobirama countered, stepping forward. A Jinchuriki's seal can break. If he loses control, if the Nine Tails is unleashed. Losing control? The seal breaking? Naruto interrupted, but his voice wasn't filled with iron certainty. It was filled with something far more startling, amusement. He let out a short, soft chuckle. That's not really an issue for us. The unexpected reaction threw everyone off balance. What do you mean? Butsuma demanded, his eyes narrowing. The seal isn't a cage to keep him locked away, Naruto explained, straightening up, his entire demeanor changing from that of a burdened soul to someone in complete command. It's more of a gateway. A two-way street. We're partners. He grinned. Friends, even. I have access to all his power, and he has access to all my senses. Impossible. Tobirama immediately shot back, his scientific mind rebelling. A Baijuu is a being of pure, mindless hatred. It cannot be befriended. It can only be contained. No Jinchuriki in history has ever achieved symbiosis. Naruto's grin widened. Then I guess I'm the first. He shrugged. Seeing is believing, right? In an instant, the atmosphere in the room changed. A torrent of brilliant, golden energy erupted from Naruto, washing over the hall like a tidal wave of pure, concentrated life. It wasn't hateful or malevolent. It was warm, powerful, and utterly overwhelming. His hair stood on end, his clothes whipped around him, and his body was enveloped in a blazing cloak of golden chakra that seemed to burn brighter than the sun. The markings on his body shifted, becoming sharp, intricate patterns reminiscent of the Sage of Six Paths himself. The elders and guards stumbled back, shielding their eyes, their senses screaming at them. Butsuma took an involuntary step back, his hand flying to the hilt of his sword out of pure instinct. Hashirama stared, his jaw slack, his own powerful chakra feeling like a flickering candle next to this inferno. Tobirama was frozen in place, his analytical mind completely short-circuiting, unable to process the data his senses were feeding him. Then, from Naruto's back, the golden chakra coalesced, rising up and forming into a massive, snarling head of a fox, its form made of pure, shimmering energy. The head turned, its intelligent, crimson eyes scanning the stunned occupants of the room. It focused on Tobirama, and a deep, rumbling voice that echoed with ancient power and dry wit filled the hall, shaking the very rafters. Sup? The effect was absolute. An elder fainted. Tobirama, the genius, the prodigy, looked like he had just seen the fundamental laws of physics shatter before his eyes. Hashirama's expression was one of pure, religious ecstasy. Butsuma Senju, the hardened clan leader, simply stared, the entire strategic landscape of his world having been redrawn in the space of a heartbeat. He wasn't dealing with a boy who was a weapon. He was dealing with a boy who was friends with a god of destruction. The concept of control had just evaporated from the room. Naruto let the chakra cloak recede, the golden light fading back into him, leaving in stunned, echoing silence in its wake. He looked at the assembly, his expression now calm and serious. My apologies for the theatrics, he said, though he didn't sound apologetic at all. But I needed you to understand. I am not a bomb waiting to go off. We are a partnership. Kurama's power is my power. And my will is his. Butsuma slowly, deliberately, lowered himself back into his chair. He looked at his sons, then back at Naruto. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. You don't give orders to a boy who can manifest the Nine Tails at will. Your status as a ward of this clan is no longer appropriate, Butsuma said, his voice strained. It is clear you are not a subordinate to be commanded. He looked at Naruto, his eyes holding a new, complex light. It was the look a king gives another king. What is it you want, Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze? What is your purpose here? Naruto smiled. I told you. I want to help my friend build his dream. He looked at Hashirama, who was still staring at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. A village where we don't have to be enemies. A place where everyone can be safe. And I have a feeling the Nine Tails and I can be very persuasive when it comes to convincing people to give peace a chance. The threat was unspoken but crystal clear. He wasn't just a weapon for the Senju to wield. He was an independent power, an ally by choice, and his allegiance was to the dream, not the clan. The cage had just been shattered, and in its place, Naruto had built a throne. The future of the world now rested not on Butsuma's command, but on Naruto's friendship. And for the first time, in a room full of the most powerful Senju, Naruto Uzumaki was truly, completely free. A clash of wills. The silence that followed Naruto's declaration was a vacuum, sucking all the air and certainty from the room. The ghostly, chakra-forged head of the Nine Tails had vanished, but its impression was burned into the retinas of everyone present. An elder, who had indeed fainted, was being quietly attended to by a guard. Tobirama stood frozen, his brilliant mind frantically trying to file this impossible new data into a coherent worldview, and failing utterly. Everything he knew about Baijuu, about Jinchuriki, about the fundamental laws of chakra, had been turned to ash. Hashirama was vibrating with an energy that was almost as overwhelming as Naruto's had been. Tears streamed freely down his face, but they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. He saw not a monster, not a weapon, but a miracle. He saw a friend who had tamed hatred itself, who embodied the very ideal of connection and understanding that he so desperately craved for the world. To him, the prophecy was no longer a grim burden, it was a promise of a radiant future. But Suma Senju, however, saw something else entirely. He was a man who played the long game, a master of strategy who moved clans like pieces on a Go board. For weeks, he had been trying to figure out how to control the powerful knight that had fallen onto his side of the board. Now, he realized he wasn't playing against a knight. He was sitting across from a second player, one who had just revealed he had a queen of unimaginable power held in reserve. The entire game had changed. Your purpose here, Butsuma repeated, his voice strained but steady, his mind already racing through 1,000 new calculations, is to help my son achieve his dream? My friend, Naruto corrected gently, but with a firmness that left no room for misinterpretation. His allegiance was to the person, not the clan. Hashirama's dream is a world where we don't need clan names to feel safe. Where children don't have to be soldiers. I share that dream. And Kurama, he patted his stomach, has agreed to help make it a reality. We can be a very powerful deterrent to those who prefer war over peace. The unspoken threat hung in the air, a velvet glove wrapped around an iron fist. We are your allies by choice. But do not think for a second that we are your pawns. Butsuma understood. He nodded slowly, a gesture of profound acknowledgement. I see. The Senju clan would be honored to call such powerful individuals its allies. He had seamlessly transitioned from commander to diplomat. The shift was not lost on anyone in the room. Your status will be amended accordingly. You are an honored guest, an ally of the highest order. Your word will carry weight in this council. Your needs will be met without question. It was a complete capitulation, a masterstroke of political maneuvering. By elevating Naruto, Butsuma was binding him closer to the Senju, not with chains, but with the silken ropes of honor, respect, and shared interest. Cool, Naruto said with a wide grin, the immense tension in the room instantly deflating. First thing I need is a big bowl of ramen. Miso pork, extra noodles. The sheer absurdity of the request, coming after a display of godlike power, was so unexpected that even Tobirama blinked, his brain stuttering. Hashirama let out a loud, booming laugh, the sound echoing with relief and joy, finally breaking the spell that had held them all captive. The aftermath of the revelation rippled through the Senju leadership like a shockwave. Naruto was no longer just a powerhouse, he was a political entity. His daily training with Tobirama continued, but the dynamic had changed yet again. The sessions were now less about a handler assessing a weapon and more about a frantic exchange of information between two minds operating on a level few could comprehend. Tobirama, the scientist, was consumed with a burning need to understand the mechanics of Naruto's partnership with Kurama. The resonance, he said days later, pacing back and forth in the library, scrolls of anatomical diagrams and chakra pathway charts spread out before them. For you to manifest his chakra in a stable, sentient form. It implies a perfect harmonization between your chakra coils and his. It shouldn't be possible. A Jinchuriki's body should instinctively reject Baijuu chakra as a foreign poison. Yours welcomes it. It integrates it. He stopped and stared at Naruto. Your Uzumaki heritage. That must be the key. The incredible vitality, the unique chakra. You are a perfect vessel. You say that like I'm a fancy vase, Naruto commented, leaning back in his chair. This is not a jest, Tobirama snapped, his scientific passion overriding his usual stoicism. This is the most significant discovery in the history of ninjutsu. If this symbiosis can be understood, replicated, it could change everything. Naruto just smiled. He knew what Tobirama was really thinking. If it can be replicated, it can be controlled. It can be weaponized. He continued to feed the prodigy a careful stream of half-truths, always keeping the true nature of his parents' legacy, of his destiny as a reincarnate, a closely guarded secret. While Tobirama sought to understand Naruto, Hashirama sought to emulate him. Inspired by Naruto's bond with Kurama, Hashirama began to approach his own Makuten with a new perspective. He started spending hours in deep meditation within the forest, not commanding the trees, but listening to them. He was trying to connect with the will of fire, the living spirit of the forest that Naruto had described. His power began to change, becoming less explosive and more controlled, more intricate. He learned to grow bridges of woven wood that were stronger than steel, to create loyal wooden soldiers that could fight alongside his clansmen, and to heal grievous wounds by accelerating cellular regeneration with his life-giving chakra. He was becoming the god of shinobi, and Naruto was his prophet. The trio became an inseparable, if unlikely, force within the Senju clan. Hashirama the heart, Tobirama the mind, and Naruto the spirit, a balance of idealism, logic, and overwhelming power that began to subtly reshape the entire clan. Under their combined influence, the Senju became more efficient, more powerful, and, surprisingly, more hopeful. The dream of a permanent village began to feel less like a fantasy and more like an inevitability. But as the Senju flourished, the Uchiha festered. The news of Naruto's perfect Jinchuriki status, confirmed by the prophecy, settled over the land of fire like a thick fog. For the Senju, it was an era of unprecedented confidence. For the other clans, it was a source of deep unease. For the Uchiha, it was a death knell. Tajima Uchiha, a man defined by pragmatic aggression, saw his clan's extinction on the horizon. The Senju now possessed the ultimate weapon, a Baijuu not just contained, but mastered. The Uchiha's pride in their position as the Senju's rivals were threatened, and their very survival felt precarious. The clan began to mobilize, not for a skirmish, but for a war they felt was being forced upon them, a final, desperate struggle against a foe who could command a god. But for Madara, the turmoil was far more personal. It was a poison in his soul. The blonde demon was not just a threat to his clan, he was a threat to his identity. The dream of a village, a world of peace, was a structure he and Hashirama were meant to build together, two pillars of equal strength. Now, this interloper, this Naruto, had been positioned by fate itself as the central pillar, casting a shadow that threatened to blot out Madara's own significance. His pride, the fiery core of his being, could not endure it. His jealousy festered into a cold, hard certainty. The prophecy had to be a lie. A grand, brilliant deception crafted by Naruto to legitimize his monstrous power and steal Hashirama's loyalty. Madara would not allow it. He would expose the false prophet and reclaim his place, his dream, and his friend. One moonless night, Naruto was meditating in the forest, in the secluded clearing that had become his sanctuary. He was trying to find a moment of peace, to untangle the web of lies and prophecy he had woven around himself. "He is coming," Kurama's voice rumbled in his mind, a low thrum of warning. "His hatred is a beacon in the dark." It is familiar. Naruto's eyes snapped open. He didn't need Kurama's warning. He could feel the oppressive aura blanketing the clearing, a chakra signature cold and sharp with killing intent. "I know." A figure detached itself from the shadows of a massive oak tree. It was Madara, clad in his black fighting gear, his presence a vortex of controlled rage. His Sharingan was blazing in the darkness, the three tomoe spinning with malevolent speed. "So," Madara said, his voice dripping with a venom Naruto had never heard from him before. "The spy reveals himself to be a monster. And the monster cloaks himself in the robes of a prophet." "Madara," Naruto said, slowly getting to his feet, his posture calm but ready. "It's not what you think. We should talk this out." "I am done with talk." Madara snarled. "I am done with your lies. I think you are a weapon the Senju plan to use to destroy us. This prophecy is a convenience, a justification for the power you wield." He drew his tanto, its blade gleaming in the faint starlight. "I will not allow it. I will not allow you to take my dream. I will not allow you to take my friend." He crouched, his muscles coiling. "Tonight, I will expose you for what you are. I will kill the monster, and I will shatter the prophecy." Before Naruto could say another word, Madara lunged. He moved with a speed that was almost supernatural, a blur of motion aimed at ending the fight before it began. His Sharingan saw not just Naruto's movements, but the minute muscle twitches that preceded them, allowing him to counter attacks that hadn't even been launched. Naruto, relying on the hyper-sensory perception of Sage Mode, met the assault. He couldn't see the future like Madara, but he could feel the present with perfect clarity, the flow of chakra, the shift of weight, the rush of air. It was a classic clash, perfect prediction versus perfect reaction. Their dance was a whirlwind of lethal grace. Madara's tanto clashed against a kunai Naruto had drawn, sparks flying like fireflies in the darkness. Naruto ducked under a vicious slash that whistled past his ear. He retaliated with a sweeping kick, but Madara, His Sharingan reading the move, anticipated it, leaping back just out of range. Your taijutsu is impressive, Madara conceded, his voice a low growl of grudging respect. But you are predictable. My eyes see your every move before you make it. You cannot win. Seeing and reacting are two different things. Naruto shot back. He created a Rasengan in his palm and surged forward, the swirling sphere of chakra humming with contained power. Futile, Madara hissed. He wove a series of hand signs with blinding speed. Fire style, Great Fireball Jutsu. A massive orb of flame erupted from Madara's mouth, a miniature sun that lit up the clearing and scorched the air. Naruto, seeing the attack was too large to dodge conventionally, thrust the Rasengan forward. The two jutsu met in a titanic explosion of fire and wind that tore up the ground and sent both shinobi flying backward. They landed on their feet, their eyes locked across the smoking clearing. I am not your enemy, Madara, Naruto yelled, genuine frustration in his voice. I'm trying to help you and Hashirama. Liar. Madara screamed, his pride wounded, his patience gone. He channeled a vast amount of chakra, his body trembling with the strain. My flames will purify this world of your existence. I will show you the true power of the Uchiha. He brought his hands to his mouth, his chest expanding. Fire style, Great Fire Annihilation. It was a sea of fire, a massive, rolling wall of incandescent flame that swept across the clearing, turning trees to charcoal and boiling the very air. It was a jutsu designed not just to defeat an opponent, but to erase them and the battlefield they stood on from existence. Naruto stared at the approaching inferno. He knew Sage Mode alone wasn't enough to stop this. He could use a tailed beast bomb and obliterate it, but the memory of Hashirama's devastated face from his vision of the future flashed in his mind. Overwhelming Madara's power with even greater power would only deepen his hatred. It would prove his point that Naruto was a monster. He had to be smarter. He had to be a bridge, not a sledgehammer. Kit, this is no time for sentiment, Kurama roared in his mind. Vaporize it. No, Naruto thought back, his mind racing. There's another way. Tobirama showed me. He slammed his hands together in a sign he wasn't used to, a sign he had watched Tobirama practice 100 times by the river. Shadow Clone Jutsu. In a puff of smoke, a dozen Naruto clones appeared around him. You think a few clones can stop this? Madara sneered from within his inferno. Nope, all the Narutos said in unison. But they can. All at once, the clones began weaving hand signs, their movements perfectly synchronized. It wasn't a fire or wind jutsu. It was the sign for a water-style technique. Drawing upon the ambient moisture in the air and the ground, and fueled by the immense chakra of Sage Mode, they all yelled the same words. Water style, water formation wall. From the ground before Naruto, a colossal amount of water erupted. It didn't form a simple wall. The clones, working in concert, shaped it, spun it, creating a massive, swirling dome of water that completely enveloped Naruto. Madara's sea of fire crashed against it, and the clearing was instantly consumed by a dense, blinding fog of steam. The roar of the fire was replaced by the deafening hiss of 1 billion gallons of water being vaporized at once. It was a perfect elemental counter. A display of immense skill and chakra control, not just raw destructive power. Through the steam, Madara stared in disbelief. His clan's ultimate technique, a jutsu that should have turned the forest to glass, had been neutralized. Not overpowered. Neutralized. It was, in its own way, more insulting than being defeated. As the steam began to clear, Madara saw Naruto standing in the center of the drenched, blackened clearing, completely unharmed. But he wasn't alone. Stop. A massive wooden hand had erupted from the ground, its fingers gently separating the two of them as if they were squabbling children. Hashirama landed between them, his face a mask of profound anguish. He looked from his best friend, panting and filled with hate, to his other friend, calm and resolute. He saw the devastation, the scorched earth, the steaming ground, but it was the emotional devastation that struck him. Madara. Naruto. What are you doing? He asked, his voice cracking with despair. Why are you fighting? Can't you see, Hashirama? Madara snarled, gesturing wildly at Naruto. He is the threat. This prophecy is a lie he is using to manipulate you, to turn you against me. He seeks to control the world with his pet monster. That's not true. Naruto protested. I'm trying to save both of you from making a mistake you'll regret for the rest of your lives. Hashirama looked from one to the other, his heart breaking. He saw the genuine, desperate plea in Naruto's eyes. And he saw the raw, wounded pride and fear in Madara's. He didn't see a monster and a liar. He saw two friends, his two most important people in the world, on a collision course. Enough, Hashirama said, his voice quiet but firm. He turned to Madara. He is my friend, Madara. And so are you. I will not choose between you. Then he turned to Naruto. And he is right. Your power. It frightens people. It frightens him. A demonstration of power is not the way to earn his trust. Madara, seeing that Hashirama would not side with him, that he was trying to mediate instead of condemn, felt a fresh surge of frustrated rage. He gave Naruto one last look, a look that promised this was far from over, and vanished into the night. Naruto stood in the now quiet clearing, the adrenaline fading, leaving only a deep sense of weariness. He looked at Hashirama, who was staring at the spot where Madara had been, his expression one of deep sorrow. I didn't want to fight him, Naruto said softly. I know, Hashirama replied, his voice heavy. He finally turned to look at Naruto, and the despair from before was gone, replaced by a troubled resolve. But fighting him is not the answer. There must be a way to reach him. A way to make him see. He looked at Naruto, his friend, his ally, the prophesied child. We will find it. Together. The rift between them was not a chasm of broken trust, but a deep, troubling fracture. The dream was damaged, but it was not dead. They had stared into the abyss of their conflict, but this time, they had pulled back from the brink. The path forward was unclear, and fraught with more danger than ever, but for the first time, they were facing it together. The fractured dream. The walk back to the Senju compound was heavy with a silence that felt different from any they had shared before. It wasn't the silence of comfortable companionship or the tense quiet of impending battle. It was a fragile, wounded silence, the kind that follows a storm where no one is certain if the foundations are still sound. The air between Naruto and Hashirama was charged with unspoken thoughts, with the ghost of a conflict that had shaken them both to their core. Hashirama's face, illuminated by the pale moonlight filtering through the canopy, was a mask of troubled resolve. The profound despair had receded, but in its place was a grim determination that seemed to age him years in the space of a few minutes. When they arrived at the compound gates, it was to the site of controlled chaos. The entire on-duty guard had been mobilized, their faces taut with anxiety. The shockwave from Naruto's water-style jutsu colliding with Madara's firestorm had been immense, a deafening hiss followed by a tremor that had rattled every house in the compound. It lacked the earth-shattering boom of a tailed beast bomb, but it was a clear signal of an S-rank confrontation. Tobirama and Butsuma were waiting for them just inside the gate, their expressions as hard and unforgiving as granite. Tobirama's red eyes, sharp and analytical, immediately swept over them, assessing their state. He noted Hashirama's emotional turmoil and Naruto's weary composure. His gaze then shifted towards the direction of the forest, where the faint smell of ozone and steam still hung in the night air. Report, Butsuma commanded. His voice wasn't a request, it was an order that tolerated no evasion. Hashirama stepped forward, his voice heavy but steady. He recounted the events with a painful honesty, his narrative colored by his own anguish. He spoke of Madara's appearance, his rage fueled by the rumors and the prophecy. He described the vicious taijutsu exchange, the clash of ninjutsu, and Madara's ultimate, terrifying fire-style technique. And then he described Naruto's counter, not with overwhelming, destructive force, but with a masterful, strategic use of water style that had perfectly neutralized the threat without escalating the violence beyond what was necessary. As he listened, Tobirama's expression shifted. The immediate, vindicated "I told you so" was absent. In its place was a flicker of something else, grudging respect. He had been working for weeks to master the principles of advanced shape and nature transformation that Naruto had introduced him to. To hear that Naruto had, on the fly, used a dozen clones to perfectly execute a massive-scale, dome-shaped water wall, a jutsu of incredible complexity and chakra control, was a feat of genius that even he had to acknowledge. Naruto hadn't just used brute force, he had used his brain. He had used a strategy Tobirama himself would have devised, if he'd had the power to do so. Butsuma, however, was not a scientist to be impressed by technique. He was a clan leader, and he saw only the political and strategic fallout. So, Butsuma said, his voice dangerously calm after Hashirama finished. The Uchiha heir infiltrated our territory, and you engaged him in a full-scale battle without informing me. You, our greatest strategic asset, he fixed his gaze on Naruto, revealed a new, critical aspect of your abilities to our greatest enemy. You showed them that not only can you match their ultimate fire style, but you can neutralize it with its elemental counter. You have taught them not to use their best weapon against you. You have given them invaluable intelligence, for free. Madara was trying to kill him, father. Hashirama protested. What was he supposed to do? His objective was to survive, not to educate, Butsuma retorted coldly. A simple retreat, a defensive maneuver to allow for escape, would have been the correct tactical decision. Instead, he chose a direct confrontation. He chose to prove a point. He looked at Naruto. Was your pride so wounded that you could not allow the Uchiha to believe his jutsu was superior? This had nothing to do with pride, Naruto said, his voice firm, meeting the clan leader's gaze without flinching. It was about sending a message. Not just to Madara, but to the Uchiha. A message that overwhelming force isn't the only answer. That for every fire, there is a water to quench it. It was a message of balance. It was a message that we possess a power they cannot hope to match, Tobirama interjected, his own strategic mind kicking in. It may have been reckless, but the outcome is the same. The Uchiha now know for certain that a direct confrontation is hopeless. It may force them to the negotiating table. Or it will force them to develop a new, more insidious weapon, Butsuma countered. Never underestimate an Uchiha's capacity for hatred and innovation when backed into a corner. He was silent for a long moment, the gears of his mind turning. The damage is done. The Uchiha know more of our strength. But we, in turn, have reaffirmed our dominance. The short-term political cost is high, but the long-term deterrent may yet prove valuable. He looked at his eldest son, at the sorrowful resolve in his eyes. He saw that something fundamental had shifted in him tonight. Hashirama. Your friend has shown you his power and his wisdom. I have shown you the path of pragmatism and strength. The path you choose to walk will determine the future of this clan. He turned, his cloak sweeping behind him. The compound is on high alert. The war has not been averted. It has merely entered a new, more dangerous phase. Do not fail me. With that, the clan leader was gone, leaving the three of them standing in the tense silence. Naruto looked at Hashirama, expecting to see the rift from the clearing still between them. But Hashirama's expression had changed. The sorrow was still there, but it was now overlaid with a new clarity. He's right, you know, Hashirama said softly, looking at Naruto. Both of you are. You were right to show him that there are other ways than pure destruction. But Tobirama is also right, it was a gamble. And my father. My father is always right that the Uchiha will not simply bend the knee. He took a deep breath. I was wrong, in the forest. I blamed you for the conflict, for the hatred in Madara's eyes. But that hatred was already there. You didn't create it. You just showed me what it looks like when it's reflected off of a power like yours. He met Naruto's eyes, his own gaze clear and strong. You said we would find a way to reach him, together. I believe that. But my father's way. The way of threats and deterrence. It will never work. It will only corner Madara further. So what do we do? Naruto asked. We build a bridge, Hashirama said, a flicker of his old, optimistic fire returning. A real one. Not with threats or demonstrations of power, but with a genuine offer. A neutral ground. A place where we can talk, not as Senju and Uchiha, but as people. Your father will never agree to it, Tobirama stated flatly. It's a security risk of the highest order. A trap. Which is why we won't ask for his permission, Hashirama said, a new, uncharacteristic slyness in his eyes. He looked from his brother to his friend. Naruto, your power has made you an equal to my father in this clan's council. Your word carries weight. And Tobirama, your strategies have saved us a dozen times over. If the three of us work together, we can do this. We can create a space for peace, even if we have to do it in secret. Tobirama stared at his brother, then at Naruto. His logical mind screamed that this was a foolish, sentimental plan doomed to fail. But he had also seen Naruto neutralize the Great Fire Annihilation. He had seen a level of skill and power that defied all logic. And he saw the unshakable resolve in his brother's eyes. His primary directive had always been to protect Hashirama. And he was beginning to realize that protecting him might no longer mean shielding him from his idealism, but helping him to build it on a foundation strong enough to withstand the harsh realities of their world. The risks are immense, Tobirama said finally, his voice stiff. The potential for betrayal is almost certain. But, he sighed, a sound of profound intellectual surrender, the potential reward. An end to the conflict. Is strategically undeniable. He looked at Naruto. If you can guarantee the security of the meeting place with your sensory abilities and your partner, then the tactical risk can be mitigated. Naruto grinned. Kurama and I can feel a fly's heartbeat from 5 miles away. Nothing will get past us. A pact was formed. A secret alliance within the Senju leadership, a conspiracy for peace. The three of them began to plan, their meetings held late at night in the seclusion of the library. Hashirama, the idealist, envisioned the principles of their new village. Tobirama, the pragmatist, designed the systems and laws that would make it functional. And Naruto, the man from the future, served as the bridge between them, tempering Hashirama's boundless optimism with harsh reality, and softening Tobirama's cynical logic with empathy and understanding. He would tell them stories of his master Jiraiya, tales of a world where different clans lived side by side, sharing marketplaces and missions, their children playing together in the streets. He was painting a picture of the future he came from, presenting it as a lost dream from the past they could reclaim. Their plan was audacious. They chose a location for their proposed neutral ground, a large, unsettled plateau between the Senju and Uchiha territories, a place of no strategic value. Using his Makuten, Hashirama would build a simple, unfortified structure, a meeting hall. Naruto, with his sage mode and Kurama's senses, would act as the sole guardian, his presence a guarantee of neutrality and a deterrent to any planned treachery. Then, they would send a message. Not from the Senju clan to the Uchiha clan, but from Hashirama to Madara. A personal invitation. Meanwhile, in the Uchiha compound, Madara was walking a darker path. He told his father that his clash with Naruto was a reconnaissance mission, that he had successfully probed the limits of his enemy's power. He spoke of the masterful water style, the sage mode, and the perfect Jinchuriki control. He used the information to stoke the flames of fear and urgency within his clan, cementing his position as the only one who truly understood the threat they faced. But in secret, he was consumed by a single, burning obsession, surpassing Naruto. He spent days locked away in the Naka shrine, poring over the ancient stone tablet, deciphering the cryptic legends of the Sharingan with a desperation he had never known. He read of the Mangekyo Sharingan, the cursed eyes that granted godlike power at the cost of one's sight, and of the ultimate prize, the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, achievable only by taking the eyes of a close relative. He looked at his younger brother, Izuna, the only other Uchiha whose skill and power came close to his own, and for the first time, a dark, terrible thought slithered into his mind. He pushed it away, horrified at his own ambition, but the seed had been planted. He also read the passages about the Sharingan's ultimate power, the ability to control the tailed beasts. If I cannot defeat the demon, Madara thought, his hands tracing the ancient script, I will put a leash on it. I will make its power my own. His path was set. He would not seek peace. He would seek power. The power to dominate, to control, to force his vision of peace upon the world, so that he would never again have to feel the humiliation of being second best. Weeks later, a lone hawk flew from the Senju compound, carrying no clan insignia. It carried a single, sealed scroll, addressed not to Lord Tajima Uchiha, but to his son. Inside was a simple message, written in Hashirama's hand. Madara, my friend. Let us end this. Meet me on the central plateau in 1 week's time. Come alone. I will be there with Naruto. It is time we talk not as Senju and Uchiha, but as the boys who once skipped stones across the Naka River. It is time we built our dream. The invitation was an act of radical, reckless hope. A single spark of light thrown into a world of ever-encroaching darkness. Everything now depended on whether Madara Uchiha chose to nurture that spark, or to extinguish it with the heel of his ambition. The Bridge of Dreams. The hawk arrived in the Uchiha compound under the cloak of twilight, its journey a silent, untraceable line against the bruised purple sky. It bore no clan insignia, a ghost of a bird on a mission that defied the rigid allegiances of the era. It landed not on the perch of the clan head, but on the stone railing of the balcony belonging to the clan heir. Madara Uchiha was standing there, staring out at the lands of his enemies, the Senju forest a dark, brooding line on the horizon. He had been standing there for hours, the cool night air doing nothing to soothe the fire in his soul. His clash with Naruto had changed him. The humiliation of being so thoroughly outclassed, of having his clan's ultimate jutsu neutralized with such casual mastery, had burned away the last vestiges of his youthful idealism. All that remained was a cold, hard ambition, a burning need for a power that would ensure he would never be made to feel so helpless again. The hawk landed with a soft flutter of wings, extending its leg, a single, sealed scroll tied to it. Madara's Sharingan flared to life, his gaze instantly dissecting the object. He saw the faint, almost imperceptible trace of Hashirama's chakra clinging to the parchment. His heart, against his will, gave a slight lurch. He untied the scroll, his movements precise and deliberate. His younger brother, Izuna, stepped out onto the balcony from the shadows of the room, his own Sharingan active and alert. Brother, Izuna's voice was sharp with suspicion. A bird with no markings, carrying a scroll imbued with Senju chakra. It is undoubtedly a trap. Of course it is, Madara replied, his voice a low murmur as he broke the seal. He didn't believe it was a trap in the conventional sense. Hashirama would never lead him into a simple ambush. This was something different. Something more dangerous. An appeal to a part of him he was trying to kill. He unrolled the parchment. The handwriting was unmistakable, a familiar, bold scrawl filled with an earnest energy that felt like a voice from a forgotten time. Madara, my friend. Let us end this. Meet me on the Central Plateau in 1 week's time. Come alone. I will be there with Naruto. It is time we talk not as Senju and Uchiha, but as the boys who once skipped stones across the Naka River. It is time we built our dream. Izuna read the words over his brother's shoulder, his expression twisting into a sneer of contempt. He speaks of dreams while sharpening the blade meant for our throats. He summons you to a meeting with his pet monster as the guarantor. It is an insult. A power play disguised as sentiment. He means to intimidate you, to force you into a humiliating surrender under the threat of his Jinchuriki. Yes, Madara said, his voice quiet, his eyes tracing the familiar signature. That is what our father would see. It is what the elders would see. It is what you see. And you do not? Izuna challenged. Madara slowly rolled the scroll back up, his knuckles white. Izuna was right, of course. From a strategic standpoint, it was a summons from a superior power. An invitation to negotiate the terms of your own obsolescence. But the words. As the boys who once skipped stones. They were a key, aimed at a lock deep within him he thought he had sealed shut. It was Hashirama, his foolish, idealistic, and only true friend, making one last, desperate appeal. But Madara was no longer that boy. That boy had died in a sea of fire and a wall of water. However, the man who remained saw not just an insult, but an opportunity. An opportunity to face this Naruto again, not in a chaotic, emotional battle, but on his own terms. An opportunity to study him, to probe his supposed ideals, to find the cracks in the armor of the false prophet. He wants to talk, Madara said, turning to face his brother, his expression a mask of cold calculation. Then we will talk. I will go. Brother, it is madness. Izuna protested. You cannot go alone. The message says to come alone. To bring guards would be to show fear. It would be a concession of weakness before the talks even begin, Madara explained calmly. And I will not be alone. My eyes will be my guard. My intellect will be my shield. He looked at Izuna, a flicker of his new, darker resolve showing in his eyes. This Naruto believes he can build a bridge. I will go and assess the strength of his materials. And I will find a way to burn that bridge to the ground. Izuna, seeing the unshakable resolve in his brother's face, fell silent. He did not understand the strategy, but he understood his brother's strength. He nodded stiffly. Be careful, Madara. The Senju are treacherous. And their demon is powerful. Power can be broken, Madara replied, his hand unconsciously tracing the hilt of his sword. Or it can be taken. A week later, under the veiled secrecy of a moonless night, 3 figures slipped out of the Senju compound. Butsuma had been informed that Naruto required a secluded, neutral location to practice controlling his Baiju's power without risking damage to the compound, a lie Tobirama had concocted with grudging admiration for its plausibility. Butsuma, seeing the logic in protecting his assets, had agreed, ordering them to take all precautions. It was the perfect cover. They traveled in silence to the Central Plateau, a wide, flat expanse of rock and sparse grass that lay in the contested no-man's land between the 2 great clans. It was a place of no strategic value, a place where battles were never fought, making it the perfect stage for their audacious gamble. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale, gray light over the land, Hashirama stepped into the center of the plateau. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and slammed his palms onto the barren rock. Mukuten, House of Diplomacy, he whispered, not as a command, but as a request. The ground did not erupt. There was no violent explosion of wood. Instead, with a gentle, sighing sound, timbers of smooth, pale wood grew from the rock. They flowed upwards, weaving themselves together, creating not a fortress, but a simple, elegant structure. It was a hall, open on all 4 sides, with a sturdy roof held up by pillars carved like ancient trees. In the center, a large, round table and 4 chairs grew directly from the floor, a single, unified piece of creation. It was a testament to his newfound control, a physical manifestation of his will for unity and peace. Tobirama watched, his analytical mind impressed despite itself. A structure with no walls. Symbolism. How very like you, brother. He began to walk the perimeter, discreetly placing a series of his own custom-made explosive tags, ones linked directly to his chakra, at key strategic points. Symbolism is well and good, but a tactical contingency is better. If this is a trap, I will bring the whole ceiling down on their heads. Naruto, meanwhile, sat cross-legged in the center of the newly formed hall. He closed his eyes and sank into himself, merging his consciousness with Kurama's. You ready, big guy? Naruto thought. I have been ready for decades, Kurama grumbled, though Naruto could feel the fox's own senses expanding, reaching out. This sentimentality will get you killed. Yeah, well, it's gotten me this far, Naruto shot back. Together, their sensory abilities fused. Naruto's sage mode felt the life force of every blade of grass, every scurrying lizard for miles. Kurama's senses, honed by centuries of tracking malice and hatred, felt the emotional state of every living creature. Their combined perception created a flawless, 360-degree net of security that stretched across the entire plateau and into the forests beyond. No one could approach without them knowing. No jutsu could be prepared in secret. No lie could be told without them sensing the flicker of deceit in the speaker's heart. He was the ultimate guarantor, the living embodiment of neutrality. They waited. The sun climbed higher in the sky, the silence broken only by the whisper of the wind across the plateau. Tobirama paced restlessly. Hashirama sat at the table, his hands clasped before him, his expression a mixture of fervent hope and gut-wrenching anxiety. Naruto remained perfectly still, his senses stretched to their limit. Then, he felt it. A single chakra signature, approaching from the east. It was sharp, cold, and burning with a pride as fierce as the sun. He's coming, Naruto said, his eyes still closed. He's alone. Hashirama shot to his feet, his heart pounding. Tobirama stopped pacing, his hand resting on a kunai hidden in his sleeve. A lone figure appeared on the edge of the plateau. Madara Uchiha walked towards them with a steady, unhurried gait. He moved with the deadly grace of a panther, his eyes, even from a distance, seeming to miss nothing. He took in the impossible wooden structure, the tense posture of Tobirama, the hopeful stance of Hashirama, and the serene, meditative form of Naruto. He stopped at the edge of the hall, his gaze falling on Hashirama. For a moment, a flicker of their old friendship, of the boys by the river, passed between them. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold, hard reality of their clan armor and the weight of the war they represented. You built this, Madara stated, his voice flat as he looked at the wooden hall. Your power grows. I built it for this meeting, Hashirama replied, his voice thick with emotion. A neutral ground. For us. Please, Madara, sit. Let us talk. Madara's gaze shifted to Naruto. With him as your guardian? You bring your pet monster to a peace talk and call it neutral? He is not my pet, Hashirama said firmly. He is our guarantor. His power ensures that neither side can act with treachery. He is here to protect the sanctity of this conversation. I am here, Naruto said, opening his eyes, his gaze calm and direct, to make sure you both actually talk, instead of just trying to kill each other. Now are you going to stand there posturing all day, or are you going to sit down? Madara's eyes narrowed at the casual dismissal, but he saw the unshakable confidence behind it. He gave a curt nod and walked into the hall, taking a seat at the round table, directly opposite Hashirama. Tobirama took a seat to Hashirama's right, his posture rigid. Naruto remained where he was, sitting cross-legged on the floor, an impartial observer. You wanted to talk, Hashirama, Madara said, his voice cold. So talk. Hashirama leaned forward, his hands spread on the table, his heart in his eyes. Madara, this has to stop. The killing, the hatred. Our fathers, their fathers before them. They have been fighting this war for generations. For what? For patches of land that are soaked in the blood of our brothers? We dreamed of something better. A village. A place where children wouldn't be sent to die. A place where the Uchiha and the Senju could finally know peace. A noble dream, Madara said, his voice laced with a cynical irony. A child's dream. Do you truly believe it is possible? You speak of peace, but your clan harbors a power that makes a mockery of the very concept of balance. How can there be peace when one side holds the ultimate weapon? He gestured towards Naruto. Your guarantor is the greatest threat to peace this world has ever known. His existence ensures that the only peace we can ever have is one dictated by the Senju, under the threat of his power. That's not true. Naruto interjected, his voice firm. My power isn't here to threaten you. It's here to create a space where you can talk without trying to stab each other. It's here to guarantee that the old ways, the ambushes, the betrayals, can't happen. It's a shield for peace, not a sword for war. A shield held by a Senju ally, Madara scoffed. Forgive me if I do not trust its impartiality. He turned back to Hashirama. Your dream is flawed, Hashirama. It is built on a foundation of sentimentality. The only way to achieve true, lasting peace is through absolute power. A single, unchallengeable will that can force all sides to lay down their arms. A power that can control the Baijiu, not just befriend them. A power that can enforce order. That's not peace, Madara. That's tyranny, Hashirama cried, his voice filled with anguish. I don't want to rule the world. I want to share it. And I want to protect it. Madara shot back, his fist slamming onto the table. Your way will lead to endless debate, to compromise, to weakness. My way will lead to order. To strength. To an end to the fighting, forever. The ideological chasm between them was laid bare. It was the fundamental conflict that would define their lives, peace through trust versus peace through power. Naruto listened, and his heart sank. Madara was already too far down his path. His pride had been so deeply wounded that he could no longer see Hashirama's dream as a partnership, he could only see it as a competition he had to win. He decided to change his approach. He couldn't convince Madara with ideals. He had to appeal to his logic, his ambition. So your plan is to get strong enough to control everyone? Naruto asked, his tone inquisitive rather than judgmental. Including me and the Nine Tails? Madara's eyes narrowed. If I must. The world needs a firm hand, not a gentle one. Okay, Naruto said, nodding slowly. Let's say you do it. Let's say you get that strong. You defeat the Senju, you leash the Baijiu, you force all the other clans to bow to the Uchiha. What then? You'll spend the rest of your life putting down rebellions. Crushing dissent. Your peace will be a constant, unending war against anyone who dares to challenge your order. You won't be a savior, Madara. You'll be the world's jailer. He leaned forward. Hashirama's dream. Our dream. Is different. It's not about forcing people to obey. It's about creating a system where they want to cooperate. A village where the Uchiha are respected for their strength in protecting the people, not feared for their power to dominate them. A place where your clan's duty is to the village, not just to itself. In that system, the Uchiha don't just survive. They thrive. They become legends. Heroes. Madara was silent. Naruto's words had bypassed his pride and appealed directly to his desire for his clan's glory. The idea of the Uchiha as honored heroes, rather than feared conquerors, was a concept he had never considered. It's a nice story, Madara said finally, though a flicker of uncertainty had entered his voice. But it is still just that. A story. Words are meaningless without the power to back them up. Then let's make a new story, Hashirama said, seizing the opening, his hope rekindled. A truce. Let us agree to a ceasefire. No more battles between our clans. We will use this time to build. We will create the village, right here, on this plateau. We will build it together, and we will invite all other clans to join us, not as subjects, but as equals. He extended his hand across the table. What do you say, Madara? Let us take the first step. Not as Senju and Uchiha. But as founders. Madara stared at the outstretched hand. Everything in him screamed that it was a trick, a show of weakness. But Naruto's words, and the genuine, desperate hope in Hashirama's eyes, had planted a seed of doubt. He looked at Hashirama, then at Naruto, then back at the hand. The future of the world hung on his decision. Chapter 5, The Unbalanced Equation. The world seemed to hang suspended in the space between Madara's gaze and Hashirama's outstretched hand. Tobirama was a statue of coiled tension. Hashirama's entire being was a silent, desperate plea. Naruto watched, his own senses stretched to their limit, feeling the chaotic storm of pride, ambition, doubt, and a flicker of longing that warred within Madara Uchiha. This was the tipping point, the moment upon which decades of history would pivot. Slowly, deliberately, Madara pulled his hand back. The hope in Hashirama's eyes faltered, collapsing like a punctured lung. Madara? Words are wind, Hashirama, Madara said, his voice a low, cold timbre that held none of their childhood warmth. You offer a truce. You speak of a village built on trust. But trust is not a gift to be given freely in a world that has taught us to trust nothing. It must be earned. Forged in the fires of action, not in the sentiment of a single conversation. He stood up, his presence seeming to draw the light from the morning sun. You want me to believe this isn't a ploy? You want me to accept your dream as a genuine offer and not a beautifully crafted cage? Then prove it. How? Hashirama asked, his voice cracking. What proof do you need? Time, Madara answered simply. Cease all Senju aggression. Withdraw your patrols from our shared borders. For one full cycle of the seasons, we will observe. If no Senju blade finds its way into an Uchiha back, if no land is claimed, if no alliances are formed that seek to surround us, then I will know your offer is not a trick. Then, perhaps, we can speak again of this village. He was not agreeing. He was dictating terms. He was testing them, forcing them to prove their sincerity through inaction, a concept almost foreign to their warring clans. But as he spoke, Naruto saw the truth of the situation with a blinding, painful clarity. He saw Madara's eyes flicker towards him, the source of the imbalance. He saw the cold, hard logic behind the demand. Madara wasn't just testing the Senju's sincerity. He was testing their reliance on their ultimate weapon. Could the Senju afford to stand down, knowing the Uchiha would be using that time to grow stronger, unless they were absolutely confident in the power of the man sitting in this hall? Naruto realized his mistake. It wasn't just his power that was the problem. It was his presence. He was a living, breathing excuse for Madara's paranoia. He was the reason the scales were so hopelessly tipped. As long as he stood with the Senju, there could be no balance. As long as he was the guarantor of peace, that peace would always feel like it was being enforced by a conqueror. He had tried to be a bridge, but his very nature made him a fortress wall. The river of time has a strong current, Kit, Kurama's voice rumbled in his mind, not with scorn, but with a quiet understanding. You cannot force it to bend. You can only guide it. Naruto knew what he had to do. The thought was a physical pain, a tearing sensation in his chest. He had found a home here, a twisted, broken reflection of the one he'd lost, but a home nonetheless. He had found brothers in the legends he had once only read about. Leaving felt like another death. But staying would ensure that the future he came to prevent would happen, perhaps even faster than before. He stood up, his movement drawing the attention of all three men. He's right, Naruto said, his voice cutting through the tense air. Hashirama and Tobirama stared at him, shocked. Madara's eyes narrowed, intrigued. This truce. It won't work, Naruto continued, looking at Hashirama with a profound sadness. Not like this. As long as I am here, standing with the Senju, the scales will never be balanced. Madara will never believe your offer is genuine. He will always see me as your pet monster, your ultimate threat. He will always see my power as a sword hanging over his head, and his pride will never allow him to build a dream in that shadow. He turned his gaze to Madara, his expression holding no animosity, only a weary understanding. And you will never stop striving for a power to match mine. You will twist yourself into knots, you will chase shadows, you will sacrifice anything and everything to stand on what you believe is equal footing. You will burn the world down just to prove you can. The accuracy of the statement struck Madara with the force of a physical blow. It was as if Naruto had reached into his soul and pulled out the dark, secret ambition he had been nurturing since their last battle. The problem, Naruto said, his voice quiet but resolute, isn't the Senju. It isn't the Uchiha. It's me. I am the unbalanced equation. My existence here, now, is accelerating everything towards a conclusion we all want to avoid. Naruto, what are you saying? Hashirama asked, a new, dawning horror on his face. Naruto gave him a small, sad smile. I'm saying the guarantor has to leave the table for the talks to begin. He took a deep breath. I will leave. The declaration landed like a thunderclap in the silent hall. No, Hashirama yelled, instantly rushing to his feet. You can't. You are our friend. Our ally. This is your home. Is it? Naruto asked gently. Or am I just a guest whose welcome is about to cause a war that will burn down the whole house? I came here by accident. I don't belong in this time. My presence here is a mistake, and I've been trying to fix it by making more mistakes. That is the most logical thing you have said since your arrival, Tobirama stated, though his face was a mask of conflicted emotions. Strategically, Naruto's departure solved 1,000 problems. It removed the primary catalyst for Uchiha aggression. It restored a semblance of balance to the world. But it also meant relinquishing the most powerful asset the Senju had ever possessed. He was watching a god-tier weapon voluntarily remove itself from the board, and it baffled him. You would truly leave? Madara asked, his voice a low murmur, his Sharingan spinning as he tried to dissect Naruto's motive, searching for the trick, the angle. You would abandon your position of power? Your influence over the Senju? It's not my position. It's not my clan, Naruto said simply. He looked from Hashirama's heartbroken face to Madara's suspicious one. This dream of a village. It's a good dream. The best one. But it has to be your dream. It has to be built by you two. Together. On equal footing. It can't be built on my power, or in my shadow. It won't be real, otherwise. It'll just be another form of control. He walked over to Hashirama, placing a hand on his friend's shoulder. You have the will. You have the heart. You are the one who will build the foundation. Then he looked across at Madara. And you have the strength to protect it. The pride to ensure its honor. You are the wall that will guard the village from the darkness. He was speaking to them not as children, but as the men they were destined to become, casting a vision of their future roles. I'm just an anomaly, Naruto finished. And it's time for me to go. Madara stared at him, the gears of his mind turning. This was the ultimate proof. The Senju's greatest weapon, the blonde demon, was voluntarily exiling himself to give their impossible dream a chance. No deception could be this elaborate. No trap could be this profound. It was a sacrifice. A gesture of trust so absolute, it was almost foolish. It was something Hashirama would do. For the first time, a genuine crack appeared in the armor of Madara's cynicism. If you leave, Madara said slowly, testing the words, testing the reality of the situation. If you vanish from these lands, and are no longer a Senju asset. He looked at Hashirama's outstretched hand, still hanging in the air. The Uchiha will honor a ceasefire. We will observe your clan. We will see if your actions align with your words. It was an agreement. A fragile, conditional, but very real truce. The first in generations. Hashirama looked at Naruto, his eyes pleading. Don't do this. We can find another way. Naruto shook his head. We can't. Not now. You're not ready. He's not ready. The world isn't ready. You need time. Time to grow into the men you're meant to be, without me forcing your hand. He gave Hashirama's shoulder a squeeze. Don't worry. This isn't goodbye forever. It's just. See you later. He turned and walked towards the edge of the wooden hall, stopping to look back one last time at the three figures who would shape the world. Hashirama, the pillar of hope, now trembling with the weight of a dream he had to carry alone. Tobirama, the pillar of logic, now forced to contend with a strategy built on faith. And Madara, the pillar of power, now faced with an act of trust that defied his entire worldview. Build something good, Naruto said, his voice carrying on the wind. Build something worth protecting. And with that, he leapt from the plateau, vanishing into the wilderness below, leaving behind a stunned silence, a fractured dream, and the faint, fragile hope of a new beginning. The wandering sage. The silence that Naruto left behind on the plateau was heavier than the rock it was built on. For a long moment, the three most powerful young men in the land of fire stood frozen, suspended in the vacuum of his absence. The sheer, world-altering gravity of his decision had yet to fully land. He had not just left a conversation, he had ripped himself out of their lives, creating a void that warped everything around it. Hashirama stared at the spot where Naruto had vanished, his hand still outstretched, reaching for a friend who was no longer there. A profound, aching loneliness washed over him, so potent it felt like a physical blow. He had lost his first friend to a river of blood and hatred. Now, he felt as if he had lost his second to a river of time and destiny. The dream of the village, which had seemed so bright and attainable just moments before, now felt impossibly heavy, a burden he wasn't sure he could carry alone. Tobirama's face was a mask of stone, but his mind was a maelstrom of chaotic calculations. He had spent months trying to understand, categorize, and predict Naruto. He had labeled him as a threat, a variable, an asset, a weapon. But sacrifice was not a variable he had ever entered into his equations. Naruto's final act was the most illogical, inefficient, and profoundly powerful move he had ever witnessed. It was a strategic maneuver that defied all strategy. For the first time, Tobirama was faced with a power he could not quantify, the power of selflessness. And it terrified him more than any tailed beast bomb. It was Madara who moved first. He slowly lowered himself back into his chair at the round table, his gaze fixed on the empty seat where Hashirama had been. He looked at his own hands, then at Hashirama's still outstretched one. The truce he had demanded as a show of dominance, a test of will, had been granted, but not by the Senju. It had been granted by Naruto. The sacrifice had been made not by his rival, but by the one man he had come to despise. Naruto had not been defeated, he had chosen to remove himself from the board. The victory felt hollow, tainted by a grudging respect that was a poison to his pride. He had gotten what he wanted, but it felt like a loss. The terms are set, Madara said, his voice quiet, directed at Hashirama but meant for all of them. 1 year. We will be watching. Without another word, he stood and walked away, not with the arrogance of a victor, but with the heavy, measured steps of a man burdened by a new, complex reality. He vanished over the horizon, a solitary figure against the rising sun. Brother, Tobirama said, finally breaking the silence, his voice strained. What have you done? Hashirama finally lowered his hand, his shoulders slumping. I have made a promise. He looked at the empty hall, the monument to a dream that now felt like a tomb. And I will keep it. The journey back to the Senju compound was a funeral march. When they revealed what had transpired, that a truce with the Uchiha had been secured at the cost of Naruto's departure, the reaction was one of stunned disbelief. But Suma Senju, upon hearing the news, locked himself in the war room for a full day. He emerged with a new, grim set to his jaw. He saw the strategic value of the ceasefire, the breathing room it afforded them. But he also saw the loss of his ultimate weapon, a loss brokered not by him, but by his idealistic son. The reins of the clan's destiny were slipping from his fingers, and he did not like it. In the following weeks, a strange, tense peace settled over the land. The Senju patrols pulled back from the borders. The Uchiha, true to Madara's word, did not advance. The endless cycle of skirmishes and retaliations ceased. For the first time in living memory, the forests were quiet. But it was not the quiet of peace. It was the quiet of two great beasts taking each other's measure, their muscles coiled, their teeth bared, waiting for the first sign of weakness. For Naruto, the first few days of his self-imposed exile were a dizzying blend of liberation and crushing loneliness. He journeyed south, with no destination in mind, simply putting distance between himself and the lives he had so thoroughly upended. The world of the Warring States period was a wild, untamed place. He traveled through vast, ancient forests that had never known the bite of an axe, forded rivers teeming with fish, and slept under a canopy of stars so bright and clear it felt like he could reach out and touch them. He was finally free. There were no lies to maintain, no prophecies to fulfill, no clan politics to navigate. It was just him, the road, and the constant, grumbling companion in his gut. So this is your grand plan? Kurama's voice echoed in his mind one night as he roasted a fish over a small campfire. Wandering aimlessly until you die of old age or boredom? It's not aimless, Naruto retorted, poking the fire with a stick. It's a strategic repositioning. It looks a lot like running away. I'm not running away, Naruto said, a little too loudly. I'm observing. I needed to get out of the equation so they could solve it themselves. I did the right thing. Perhaps, Kurama conceded, a rare note of something other than scorn in his voice. The boy's hatred was a fire, and you were the wind. The more you blew, the higher it burned. By removing yourself, you have denied it fuel. See? The right thing, Naruto said, though he didn't feel the conviction in his own words. So what now? What do I do? You told them you were a wandering sage taught by a hermit, Kurama stated. Perhaps it is time you truly became one. This world is not just the land of fire. There are other lands, other clans, other powers. You know nothing of this era. Your knowledge is a weapon, but it is a weapon from a future war. To be effective here, you must understand the current battlefield. The fox was right. Naruto's entire plan had been centered on Konoha, on the Senju and the Uchiha. But the world was much bigger than that. The seeds of the other great villages, of Sunagakur, Kirigakure, Iwagakure, and Kumagakure, were being sown right now in the blood and soil of this era. And there were the other Baijuo. His brothers and sisters. In his time, they were scattered, captured, and ultimately freed. But now? Where were they? Were they rampaging, wild and free? Or were they already contained, their hosts living lives of misery and isolation just as he once had? A new purpose began to form in his mind. It was a purpose born not of a grand prophecy, but of his own heart. He would travel the world. He would learn its geography, its politics, its people. And he would find his siblings. He would find the other Jinchuriki. He was the first perfect Jinchuriki of this era, a master of his Baiju's power, a partner to his inner demon. Maybe he could teach them. Maybe he could show them that they didn't have to be monsters. That they didn't have to be alone. All right, Kurama, Naruto said, a new light in his eyes as he took a bite of his fish. You win. Let's go see the world. The sun-scorched land. The first week of Naruto's exile was a deafening silence. After years spent in the constant, humming tension of the Senju compound, surrounded by wary guards, a suspicious handler, and an endlessly cheerful friend, the absolute solitude of the wild was jarring. He walked south, putting the land of fire behind him, his only compass the sun, his only destination away. He moved through forests so ancient and vast they seemed to have forgotten the touch of man, their canopies creating a perpetual twilight on the forest floor. He crossed rivers with water so clear he could count the stones on the bottom. At night, he would make a small, smokeless campfire and stare up at a brilliant, unpolluted sea of stars, a celestial map utterly alien to the one he had known in his own time. He was, for the first time since arriving in this era, completely and utterly free. The feeling should have been liberating. Instead, it was terrifying. The silence was not peaceful, it was empty. The freedom was not liberating, it was aimless. He had ripped himself from the lives of the only people he knew, and in doing so, he had untethered himself from the world. He was a ghost, haunting an age that was not his own. On the 8th night, sitting by a crackling fire in the foothills of a nameless mountain range, the loneliness became a physical weight, crushing the air from his lungs. He found himself unconsciously looking over his shoulder, half expecting Hashirama to appear with a couple of bowls of rice, or Tobirama to emerge from the shadows with a cutting remark. But there was only the sound of crickets and the whisper of the wind. It was in the hazy space between waking and dreaming that the familiar, grumbling voice finally echoed in his mind. "So this is your grand plan?" Kurama's voice rumbled. "You have decided to die of boredom." Naruto shot up, a wide grin breaking across his face as he plunged into his mindscape. Kurama was there, lying down, his 9 tails swishing lazily, his crimson eye glaring at Naruto with its usual disdain. "It's about time you woke up, you lazy furball," Naruto exclaimed, the relief in his voice palpable. "Humph. I was conserving my energy," Kurama rumbled. "You have abandoned the only fortress that was willing to protect you. So I ask again. What is your plan?" "I'm observing," Naruto said, less confidently than he would have liked. "I had to get out of the equation so they could solve it." "An equation you created," Kurama pointed out. "You accelerated their growth, you made yourself the central pillar of their world, and then you rip that pillar out and wonder why the structure is shaking. The truce you created is a farce." "I know that," Naruto snapped. "But what was I supposed to do? Let Madara walk further down that path until he was too far gone to save? You cannot save someone who does not wish to be saved," Kurama said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. "Your mistake was not in wanting to save him. It was in believing you could do it quickly." The fox's words hit home. Naruto had been trying to apply a battlefield solution to a problem that required a lifetime of work. "So I was right to leave," Naruto said quietly. "To give them time." "You were right that your presence was a catalyst for conflict," Kurama agreed. "But leaving without a purpose is just a slower form of suicide. You told them you were a wandering sage. It is time you truly became one. This world is not just the land of fire. My siblings are scattered across these lands. In your time, you knew their fate. But what of this time?" A new, vast possibility opened up in Naruto's mind. The other Baijuo. The other Jinchuriki. "Where is Shukaku?" Kurama continued. "Is he still sealed within a priest in the desert? Where is Isabu? Are they rampaging free, or have they already been enslaved, their hosts living lives of misery and fear, just as you once did?" Naruto thought of Gaara, of Utakata, of their pain and isolation. A new purpose, born from his own heart, took root. "I could find them," Naruto whispered. "I could help them." "They will not trust you," Kurama warned. "Then I'll have to convince them," Naruto said, a familiar, stubborn fire lighting in his eyes. "You and I. We're partners. We're proof that it doesn't have to be master and slave. If I can show them that, maybe I can change things. Not just for the Senju and Uchiha, but for every Jinchuriki who is suffering right now. It is a path fraught with peril," Kurama stated. "Yeah, well," Naruto said, a wide, confident grin spreading across his face. "Good thing I won't be doing it alone." He came back to himself, the loneliness gone, replaced by the steady hum of his new resolve. He had a mission. He looked south, towards the vast, unforgiving deserts of the land of wind. He could feel it, even from this distance. A faint, unstable pulse of chakra. Sand, wind, and a raging, chaotic loneliness. "All right, Kurama," Naruto said to the starry sky. "First stop, we go find your little brother." The border between the land of fire and the land of wind was not a line on a map, it was a slow, brutal siege of life by sand. The lush, vibrant forests thinned out, the trees becoming stunted and twisted. The rich soil gave way to red clay, then to gravel, and finally, to the endless, rolling dunes of a sun-scorched sea. The heat was a physical blow. The sun was a merciless, white-hot eye in a sky of bleached blue, and the wind was a convection oven, carrying not relief, but fine, stinging grains of sand. He walked for days, a small, solitary figure in an ocean of gold. "Of all the miserable places in this world," Kurama's voice rumbled, "you choose the one with the most sand. It gets everywhere." "Quit complaining," Naruto muttered, adjusting the cloth he had wrapped around his face. "This is Shukaku's turf. He was always the most unstable of us," Kurama mused. His mind was fractured by the sand he commanded. "He hated me most of all, for the sage gave me the most tails. If he senses my chakra, he will not be welcoming." Naruto's destination was the nascent settlement that would one day become Sunagakur. In this era, it was a fortified oasis, a collection of adobe buildings huddled together for protection against the harsh desert and the warring clans of the region. The shinobi here were pragmatic and ruthless, their survival dependent on mastering the deadly arts the desert taught: puppetry, poison, and assassination. Naruto knew he couldn't just walk through the main gate. A blonde-haired, blue-eyed stranger would be captured or killed before he took 5 steps. He needed a cover, a way to blend in. As he neared the cluster of oases that supported the main settlement, he saw his opportunity: a merchant caravan, its camels laden with goods, making its slow way towards the village. Caravans meant travelers, guards, and a degree of anonymity. He approached the caravan cautiously, not as a shinobi, but as a weary traveler. He had shed his Senju-provided clothes for simple, earth-toned robes he'd traded for in a small village, his appearance now nondescript, save for his hair and eyes. The caravan master was a leathery-skinned man with shrewd, calculating eyes named Goro. He looked Naruto up and down with suspicion. "Looking for work? Or a handout?" "Work," Naruto said, his voice slightly hoarse from the dust. "I can guard. I'm good in a fight." Goro scoffed. "You? You look like you'd be blown over by a strong gust of wind. The desert bandits would chew you up and spit you out." "Try me," Naruto said with a calm smile. As if on cue, a lookout shrieked. From over the dunes, a dozen figures on large, lizard-like mounts charged towards them, their weapons glinting in the sun. Bandits. Before the caravan guards could even form a defensive line, Naruto moved. He didn't use clones or a Rasengan. He was just a blur of motion. He flowed through the surprised bandits, a whirlwind of precise strikes. He disabled their mounts with targeted kicks to their legs and disarmed the riders with quick, sharp blows to their wrists and elbows. In less than 30 seconds, the entire bandit troop was on the ground, groaning and disarmed, their attack completely and utterly dismantled without a single life being taken. Naruto walked back to the stunned caravan, dusting the sand from his hands. He looked at the gaping Goro. "Is the job still open?" He was hired on the spot. For the next 2 weeks, Naruto traveled with the caravan, earning his keep as a guard. He learned the rhythms of the desert, the unspoken laws of the trade routes. He listened to the gossip of the merchants, gathering intelligence. He heard stories of the future Kazekage's clan, the nominal rulers of the region, and their struggles against the other Sand clans. And he heard whispers of the possessed priest, a man who lived in the grand temple at the center of the village, a man said to be cursed with an unquenchable thirst for blood, a man who never slept. Bingo! When the caravan finally arrived at the gates of the Sand village, Naruto was no longer a suspicious stranger. He was Naru, the quiet but surprisingly capable guard for Goro's company. He was given passage. As he stepped through the massive stone gates and saw the adobe buildings carved into the rock face of the crater, he took his first real step into the land of wind. His mission to find and understand Shukaku had officially begun. The village carved from bone. Stepping through the gates of the Proto-Sanagakur was like entering a different world, one carved from bone and baked in the sun. The village was a marvel of defensive architecture, nestled deep within a massive, natural crater. The buildings, made of sun-dried adobe that blended seamlessly with the surrounding cliffs, were built into the crater walls themselves, accessible by a labyrinthine network of steep staircases and narrow, winding paths. It was a fortress designed by nature and perfected by a people who understood that in the desert, the best defense was to become invisible. The air inside the crater was still and hot, the oppressive sunlight reflecting off the pale rock, creating a blinding glare. The streets were narrow canyons, filled with the bustling, pragmatic energy of a frontier town. Merchants haggled in loud, sharp voices over bolts of heat-resistant cloth and casks of precious water. Shinobi, their faces covered in wraps to ward off the sun and sand, moved with a quiet, deadly purpose, their eyes constantly scanning for threats. There was no laughter here, no idle chatter. Every interaction had a purpose, every glance was a calculation. It was a village built on survival, and it had no room for sentiment. As Naru, the quiet caravan guard, Naruto was afforded a degree of anonymity. Goro, the caravan master, impressed by his skill and lack of questions, paid him his wages and gave him a nod of grudging respect. "You handle yourself well, kid. If you ever need work, find me when I pass through next season." "But a word of advice," Goro added, his voice dropping low, "this place eats outsiders. Keep your head down, your mouth shut, and don't go near the Grand Temple. Nothing good comes from that place." Naruto thanked him for the advice and melted into the crowds. He found lodging in a small, dusty inn near the main marketplace, a place frequented by travelers and mercenaries. It was the perfect listening post. For the next few days, he established a routine. He would spend his mornings doing simple manual labor, helping unload cargo, mending nets for sand fishing, earning a few coins and building a reputation as a quiet, reliable worker. In the evenings, he would sit in the corner of the inn's common room, nursing a small cup of weak tea, and simply listen. The whispers about the possessed priest were everywhere. They were spoken in hushed, fearful tones, as if saying his name too loudly might draw his attention. They called him Bunpaku, and they spoke of him not as a man, but as a curse upon the village. My cousin was on temple duty last week, one shinobi muttered to his companion over a game of Go. He said he didn't see the priest once, but he heard him. All night. Pacing. Talking to himself. Or to the demon inside him. They say he doesn't sleep, the other replied, his voice a whisper. Ever. The sand demon won't let him. If he closes his eyes, the beast will take over completely and rampage through the village. He is our ultimate weapon, a third man, a grizzled veteran with a scarred face, interjected from a nearby table. The leader's clan uses him as a threat to keep the other clans in line. But you don't keep a rabid sand lion in your house without expecting to get bitten. He is a weapon with no safety. One day, he will break, and he will drown us all in sand. Naruto absorbed every word. This was far worse than his own childhood. He had been ostracized, yes, but he had been allowed to live, to walk among the villagers. This Jinchuriki, Bunpaku, was a prisoner in his own temple, a bogeyman used to frighten children and a political tool used to intimidate enemies. His isolation was absolute. During his meditations, Naruto would extend his sage senses, carefully probing the village's chakra network. The ambient chakra was thin and dry, like the desert air itself. But at the very center of the crater, housed within the largest, most imposing structure, the Grand Temple, was a maelstrom. It was a chaotic, raging tempest of two distinct chakras clashing against each other in a perpetual, agonizing war. One was the wild, furious energy of Shukaku, filled with rage, hatred, and a deep, grating loneliness. The other was the chakra of the host, Bunpaku. It was faint, flickering, and stretched to the breaking point, frayed by decades of sleepless torment and utter despair. Feeling it was like listening to a soul screaming in silence. The seal is crude, Kurama noted from within the mindscape, his voice a low growl of disgust. It is not designed for harmony or control. It is a simple cage, meant only to contain. The fool who created it did not understand the nature of a baijuu. They have locked my brother in a prison with his jailer, and they wonder why he screams. Naruto knew a direct approach was suicide. The temple was guarded by the leading clan's elite, shinobi who would kill him on sight. He couldn't fight his way in, that would only prove their fears about outsiders and make it impossible to ever reach Bunpaku. He had to be smarter. He had to find a crack in their defenses. He spent his days observing the temple from a distance. He watched the guard rotations, memorized their patrol routes. He saw the daily deliveries of food and water, left at the outer gate, never brought inside by the deliveryman, but collected later by silent, masked monks who served the temple. The entire structure was designed around containment and isolation. His break came from an unlikely source, Goro, the caravan master. Naruto ran into him in the marketplace a week after their arrival. Naru. Still in one piece, I see, Goro greeted him, a rare smile on his face. I'm heading out on a special run tomorrow. A private contract. The pay is good, but the cargo is unusual. What kind of cargo? Naruto asked. Goro leaned in, his voice dropping. Herbal incense and calming agents. A special blend, brewed by a hermit out in the wastes. It's a monthly delivery, a secret one, for the temple priests. He grimaced. It's for the possessed one. They burn it day and night, trying to soothe the demon, trying to help the poor bastard get an hour of sleep. Naruto's mind lit up. This was it. His way in. You'll need an extra guard for a run like that, he said, his voice casual. The desert is dangerous, especially when you're carrying something valuable. Goro looked at him, then at the memory of a dozen bandits lying groaning in the sand. He nodded. You're right. Be at the west gate before sunrise. The pay is triple. The next morning, under the cover of pre-dawn darkness, Naruto stood with Goro and a small, hand-picked team of guards. The cargo was a single, heavily sealed crate. The journey was tense, taking them along a winding, hidden path into a secluded canyon where the delivery was to be made. They arrived at a small, unassuming side entrance to the temple complex, a simple wooden door set into the cliff face, far from the main gates. Two stoic, masked priests were waiting for them. They wordlessly handed Goro a heavy pouch of gold and took possession of the crate. As they were about to turn and leave, Naruto acted. Wait, he said, his voice calm but firm. The priests and Goro's men all turned to look at him. "The incense," Naruto said, his eyes on the masked priests. "The blend is wrong this month. The binders are too dry. When you burn it, it will release a burst of irritating smoke before the calming agents can take effect. It could agitate him, rather than soothe him." The priest stared at him. "And how would a caravan guard know the intricacies of our sacred incense?" One of them asked, his voice muffled by his mask. "My family were nomadic apothecaries before we lost our way," Naruto lied smoothly, calling on a fragment of his old cover story. "I know the properties of desert herbs. I can fix it. But I must do it now, before the incense is taken inside and exposed to the air." It was a massive gamble. He was banking on their desperation, on their fear of agitating the beast in their basement. The two priests exchanged a long, silent look. Naruto could feel the conflict in their emotions through his sage senses, suspicion warring with a desperate need. Finally, the lead priest gave a curt nod. "You may enter the antechamber to adjust the blend," he said. "But you will be watched. And you will not go any further into the temple." "Understood," Naruto said with a respectful bow. Goro shot him a look that was a mixture of terror and disbelief, but he said nothing, merely pocketing his gold and ushering his other men away. He wanted no part of this. The heavy wooden door creaked open, and the priests led Naruto inside, into the lion's den. The air was immediately cooler, and thick with the scent of old stone and burning incense. He was in a small, bare antechamber, the sealed crate sitting in the center of the floor. As one priest stood guard at the door, the other watched with hawk-like intensity as Naruto opened the crate. He didn't actually know anything about incense, but he knew chakra. He placed his hands over the bundles of herbs and channeled a minuscule, almost undetectable thread of his own warm, life-giving chakra into them, subtly altering their energetic properties. But his real focus was on his senses. Now, inside the temple walls, the chakra of Shukaku and Bunpaku was a roaring inferno in his mind. The rage, the loneliness, the despair. It was 1,000 times more potent here. He could pinpoint its source now. Down. Deep beneath the stone floors. He finished his work and closed the crate. "It is done. The blend is stable now. You have our thanks," the lead priest said stiffly. "Now, you must leave." As they escorted him back to the door, Naruto accidentally stumbled, his hand bracing against the stone wall. In that single moment of contact, he pulsed his chakra, a tiny, almost imperceptible sage mode marker that seeped into the stone, a breadcrumb for him to follow later. It was a derivative of the Flying Thunder God technique, a location marker without the teleportation formula attached. It was his anchor. He was escorted out into the sunlight, the door booming shut behind him. He had not met the Jinchuriki. He had not spoken to the Baijuo. But he had breached the fortress. And he had left his key behind. That night, Naruto did not sleep. He sat on the roof of his inn, staring at the Grand Temple, a dark silhouette against the starry desert sky. He had a way in. He knew the location of his target. The time for observation and infiltration was over. The next phase was about to begin. And it would be far more dangerous. The screaming silence. The desert night was a cold, silent thing, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat of the day. A blanket of brilliant, uncaring stars stretched from one wall of the crater to the other. The village of sand was asleep, its narrow streets empty, the adobe buildings dark silhouettes against the starlight. But Naruto was not looking at the stars. From his perch on the roof of the inn, his gaze was fixed on the Grand Temple, a place of manufactured silence, a place that held a screaming soul. The guards have settled into their rotations, Kurama's voice rumbled in his mind. Their vigilance is lazy. They believe the stone walls and their reputation are enough to deter any intruder. Their mistake, Naruto murmured, closing his eyes and drawing on the natural energy around him. The world snapped into focus with the clarity of sage mode. He could feel the sleeping village, the slow, rhythmic breathing of its inhabitants. He could feel the bored, complacent chakra of the guards on the outer walls. And he could feel his destination, the tiny, almost imperceptible chakra marker he had left in the temple's antechamber. It shone in his senses like a lone lighthouse in a stormy sea. He moved. He was not a flash of yellow, not a blur of impossible speed. He was a whisper of motion, a shadow detaching itself from other shadows. He flowed across the rooftops, his movements silent and fluid, his landing softer than a grain of sand falling on a dune. The labyrinthine layout of the village, designed to confuse invaders, was irrelevant to him. He moved not by sight, but by sense, following the beacon of his own chakra. He reached the base of the Grand Temple, a sheer cliff face of rock and faith. The main gates were heavily guarded, but the side entrance where he had made the delivery was isolated, watched only by a single, board guard on a ledge 50 feet above. Naruto scaled the rock face with practiced ease, his chakra-infused hands and feet finding purchase in the smallest cracks, his movements as silent as a spider climbing a wall. He reached the simple wooden door of the antechamber and paused, listening. He could feel the two masked priests inside, their breathing slow and even. They were meditating, not sleeping. He couldn't risk opening the door. Instead, his gaze traveled upwards, to a small, barred window 20 feet above the door, designed for ventilation, not passage. With a single, silent leap, he was there. The bars were thick iron, but Naruto simply placed his hands on them and channeled a minute amount of his chakra, subtly vibrating the metal at a high frequency. After a few seconds, the mortar holding the bars in place had turned to dust. He carefully lifted the iron grate out and slipped through the opening, landing inside the antechamber in a silent crouch. The two priests didn't stir. The air was thick with the cloying, sweet smell of the calming incense he had fixed. It was doing its job, lulling the guards into a state of placid inattention. He moved past them, a ghost in their midst, and slipped through the inner door into the temple proper. The interior was a maze of silent, stone corridors, lit only by the occasional flickering oil lamp. The air was cold and stale. But beneath the silence, there was a sound, one that only Naruto's sage senses could truly perceive. It was a constant, low-frequency hum of agony. A psychic scream of rage, despair, and loneliness that saturated the very stones of the foundation. He followed the screaming silence downwards. He descended flight after flight of rough-hewn stairs, going deeper into the bedrock beneath the village. The air grew colder, damper. The smell of incense was replaced by the smell of wet stone and old, deep-seated misery. He finally reached the source. A massive, circular vault, its entrance sealed by a door of solid stone that must have weighed tons. The door was covered in a complex, spiraling array of sealing tags, their ink faded with age. It was an Uzumaki design, Naruto recognized, but a crude and brutal one. This wasn't a seal meant for harmony, like his own. This was a cage, pure and simple, designed to crush the will of whatever was inside. The fools, Kurama snarled in his mind. They have used a power they do not understand to chain my brother to a mortal, and in doing so, have chained the mortal to my brother's madness. They suffer together, endlessly. Naruto knew he couldn't break the seal without alerting the entire village. But as he examined the door, he saw a small, barred slot at eye level, likely used by the priests to pass food through without ever having to open the door. It was his only opening. He peered through the bars. The room inside was a vast, dark cavern. In the center, chained to the floor with massive, chakra-suppressing manacles, was a man. He was shockingly thin, his body little more than skin stretched over a skeletal frame. His hair was long and matted, his robes tattered. It was Bunpaku. He was pacing endlessly in a small circle, as far as his chains would allow, his movements jerky and erratic, like a broken puppet. He was muttering to himself, his head twitching from side to side as if arguing with a ghost. No. No sleep. Mustn't sleep, he mumbled, his voice a dry rasp. He'll get out. He'll kill them all. Always screaming. So loud. Make it stop. Naruto's heart clenched. This was a man who had been tortured every second of every day for decades, not by his enemies, but by his own people. By his own Baijuo. Naruto took a deep breath. Bunpaku, he said, his voice a soft whisper through the grate. The pacing stopped. Bunpaku froze, his head slowly turning towards the door. His eyes, wide and bloodshot from a lifetime of insomnia, fixed on the grate. They held a terror so profound it was almost absolute. Who's there? He hissed, scrambling backwards, away from the door. Another one? Come to watch me suffer? To make sure the monster is still in its cage? No, Naruto said gently. I'm not here to watch you suffer. I'm here to talk. Talk? Bunpaku let out a crazed, bitter laugh. The only one who talks to me is the demon. He screams. He never stops screaming. He wants to kill you. He wants to kill everyone. I do. A new voice roared, not through the grate, but directly in Naruto's mind. It was a grating, sandy sound, filled with a cackling, hysterical rage. Let me out, and I'll drown this entire pitiful village in a tidal wave of sand. I'll show them fear. It was Shukaku. Naruto winced at the sheer, unfiltered malice in the mental shout. He focused, projecting his own thoughts towards the Baijuo. Calm down, Shukaku. I'm not here to fight you. A human who can hear me? And you stink of that nine-tailed fox. You are his Jinchuriki. Shukaku shrieked with glee. Excellent. Let me kill you and your arrogant host. I'll show that smug fox who is truly the strongest. The mental assault was chaotic and powerful, but to Naruto, who had faced down Kurama at his absolute worst, it was like a child's tantrum. He simply weathered the storm of hatred, his own mind a calm fortress. He turned his focus back to the terrified man in the cell. Bunpaku, Naruto said, his voice soft again. I know what it's like. The loneliness. The whispers. The glares of the villagers. The feeling that you're a monster, a weapon, not a person. Bunpaku stopped muttering, his crazed eyes narrowing slightly. You know nothing. I know what it's like to have everyone you meet look at you with fear, Naruto continued, pouring the truth of his own childhood into his words. I know what it's like to have no friends, to be utterly alone. I know what it's like to have a voice in your head that never, ever stops screaming. Bunpaku stared at him, his frantic energy slowly draining away, replaced by a stunned, wary curiosity. How? How could you possibly know? Because, Naruto said, deciding it was time for a small demonstration. I'm just like you. He channeled a tiny wisp of Kurama's chakra, just enough to manifest. His blue eyes flashed crimson for a fraction of a second, the pupil becoming a slit. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible change, but in the dim light of the cavern, it was undeniable. Bunpaku gasped, his eyes widening in utter disbelief. He saw not a monster, not a jailer, but a reflection. What is this? Shukaku's mental voice demanded, his rage momentarily replaced by confusion. What are you doing, human? You share his chakra? Willingly? He is not my jailer. He is my partner, Naruto projected calmly back at the one-tailed beast. And I am his. We are friends. Friends? Shukaku howled with laughter, a sound like grinding stones. Impossible. A human and a Baijuu can never be friends. Humans are liars. Cages. They only want our power. Not all of us, Naruto said. He turned his attention back to Bunpaku, who was now staring at him, his mouth slightly agape. Your seal. It's a cage. It's forcing you and Shukaku together, making you fight for control of your own mind. It's turning his loneliness into your madness, and your fear into his rage. But it doesn't have to be that way. What? What other way is there? Bunpaku whispered, taking a hesitant step towards the door. It was the first time he had willingly moved towards another living being in years. There's a way where you're not his jailer, and he's not your prisoner, Naruto explained. There's a way where you can work together. Where you can find peace. Even in the silence. He knew he couldn't push any further tonight. He had breached the walls of the temple, and more importantly, he had breached the walls of Bunpaku's isolation. He had planted a seed of an impossible idea in the minds of both the tormented man and the raging demon. I have to go now, Naruto said softly. But I'll be back. We'll talk again. He pulled back from the grate, turned, and melted back into the shadows of the temple, his mission for the night complete. In the dark, silent cavern, Bunpaku stood motionless, staring at the door. For the first time in decades, the screaming in his head had quieted slightly. It was replaced by a single, bewildering question. And deep within him, the raging sand demon, Shukaku, was also silent, his hatred momentarily eclipsed by a sliver of grudging, infuriating curiosity. A blonde-haired Jinchuriki who called his Baijuu a friend. The idea was absurd. It was impossible. And yet, it had happened. The first crack had appeared in the foundation of their shared prison. A conversation in the cage. Naruto's first visit left a hairline fracture in the monolithic despair of the Grand Temple's dungeon. His subsequent visits began the slow, arduous process of widening that crack, letting in slivers of an impossible light. For the next 2 weeks, he maintained his dual identity. By day, he was Naru, the quiet, unassuming laborer, his presence in the village marketplace becoming a familiar, unremarkable sight. By night, he was the ghost of the temple, a silent shadow slipping through the stone corridors to stand before the sealed door. Each night, he would speak to Bunpaku through the grate. He never offered pity. He offered something far more valuable, empathy. He told the emaciated priest stories, not of grand battles, but of small moments. He spoke of sitting on a swing, watching other children play. He spoke of the hollow ache of an empty apartment. He spoke of the frustration of failing at jutsu, the joy of finally getting it right, and the unparalleled taste of a bowl of Ichiraku ramen after a hard day's training. He painted a picture of a life, a real life, lived under the shadow of a Baijuu, and Bunpaku, who had known nothing but a cage, listened with a desperate, starved attention. He called me a monster, Bunpaku whispered one night, his voice less frantic, more sorrowful. The head priest. I was just a boy. I had scraped my knee, and he looked at me, at the blood, And he called me a monster who didn't deserve to feel pain like a human. The old man who ran my village, he looked at me like that sometimes, Naruto replied softly, the memory a dull ache. Not with hatred. But with fear. The fear of what was inside me. The fear of a weapon he couldn't control. It's a heavy thing, to be looked at like you're not a person. Bunpaku pressed his face closer to the grate, his wide, bloodshot eyes searching Naruto's. You truly understand. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of dawning, unbelievable fact. While he spoke to Bunpaku, Naruto was engaged in a separate, silent war. Shukaku's mental assaults were relentless. The one tail threw every ounce of his sand and wind-laced hatred at Naruto's mind, trying to break his concentration, to drive him mad with chaotic rage. Liar. Deceiver. Shukaku would shriek, his voice a sandstorm in Naruto's consciousness. You speak of friendship, but you are just another human, weaving a more intricate cage of words. The fox has made you soft. I will not be fooled. Naruto never fought back. He simply stood his ground, his mind a calm, unbreachable fortress anchored by his bond with Kurama. He let the waves of hatred wash over him, and in the brief moments of quiet between the storms, he would project a single, simple thought back at the raging Baijuo. You sound lonely. This infuriated Shukaku more than any counterattack could have. Lonely? I am Shukaku. I am a god of the desert. I need no one. Then why are you screaming so loud? Naruto would reply calmly. Kurama used to do the same thing. He screamed and thrashed and hated everyone because he was alone, locked in a cage, and had forgotten what it was like to have his name spoken with anything but fear. He began to tell Shukaku stories, too. Not of human friendship, but of a time long past. He channeled Kurama's own memories, ancient and vast, through their shared link. He projected the image of the Sage of Six Paths, a kind old man with gentle eyes, speaking to the 9 young, newly formed Baijuo. He showed Shukaku the memory of the sage giving each of them their name, calling them his children, and telling them that though they would be scattered, they would one day be brought together again by a boy with blue eyes who would show them a different path. Tricks. Shukaku raged, but the memory had shaken him. The old man abandoned us. Left us to be hunted and caged by you wretched humans. He trusted us, Naruto corrected. He trusted that we could one day learn to live together. He trusted me. The progress was slow, measured in millimeters. But it was progress. Bunpaku began to pace less. He started to speak in full sentences. And Shukaku's mental assaults, while still filled with rage, now had a faint undercurrent of confused curiosity. The turning point came on the 14th night. I can't do this forever, Bunpaku whispered, his forehead pressed against the cold bars of the food slot. The sleeplessness. It is a poison. One day, I will fall. And he will get out. You don't have to hold him back, Naruto said. You have to work with him. You have to talk to him. Not as your demon. As your partner. He won't listen. He only screams. Then you have to scream back, Naruto said. But not with fear. With your own will. Show him you are not just a cage. Show him you are a person. He closed his eyes. Kurama, give me a hand. This is a monumentally foolish idea, the fox grumbled, but Naruto could feel him acquiesce. Naruto channeled a significant amount of his own chakra into the seal on the door. He wasn't trying to break it. He was trying to use his Uzumaki blood and his perfect Jinchuriki resonance to temporarily alter its function. He was turning the one-way mirror of their shared mind into a two-way street. He was forcing them into a room together. Bunpaku, Naruto instructed, close your eyes. Go inside your own mind. Find the cage. I'll be right there with you. Bunpaku, trusting this stranger more than he had ever trusted anyone in his life, did as he was told. He closed his eyes, and for the first time, instead of fighting the demon within, he walked towards it. He found himself in a vast, desolate desert under a blood-red sky. In the center, trapped by colossal chains that seemed to be forged from his own despair, was a creature of pure, unrestrained chaos. A titanic tanuki made of swirling sand, its eyes yellow and crazed, its mouth open in a permanent, hysterical grin. Shukaku. So, the worm finally decides to visit? Shukaku cackled, his voice a grating roar that shook the very foundations of the mindscape. Come to beg me for a moment's peace before I devour your pathetic soul? Bunpaku trembled, his instinct to flee overwhelming. But then, a second figure appeared beside him, a reassuring presence of warm, golden light. Naruto. Hey, Shukaku, Naruto said calmly, looking up at the giant Baijuo. Nice place. A little dry for my taste. Shukaku's grin faltered, his crazed eyes locking onto Naruto. You. How are you here? I told you, Naruto said. We're neighbors. In a way. He turned to Bunpaku. Don't be afraid. This is your mind. Your rules. He's only as powerful here as you let him be. He looked back at the Baijuo. And you, he said to Shukaku. You can stop the tough guy act. I know you're just a lonely little tanuki who misses his dad. Shukaku let out a roar of pure fury and swiped at them with a colossal claw of sand. But Bunpaku, emboldened by Naruto's presence, stood his ground. He held up a hand, and a wall of shimmering, ethereal chains, a manifestation of his own will, shot up from the ground, blocking the attack. Shukaku stared, stunned. The worm had never fought back before. My name, Bunpaku said, his voice shaking but firm, echoing with a strength he didn't know he possessed, is Bunpaku. I am not your cage. I am your host. And I will not be your prisoner any longer. Naruto smiled. The first words of a real conversation had been spoken. They didn't achieve a perfect harmony that night. But for the first time, Bunpaku and Shukaku truly saw each other. They saw the shared loneliness, the shared misery of their forced confinement. It was a beginning. As Naruto slipped out of the temple and back to his inn, he knew he had accomplished his primary mission. He had given them a path. But as he looked out over the sleeping village, his sage senses picked up a new, disturbing development. The chakra signatures of the elite clan guards were no longer just stationed around the temple's perimeter. There were more of them now. And they were hidden on the rooftops, their gazes fixed not on the outside world, but inwards, on the temple itself. They were a perimeter of watchers, and their attention felt sharp, focused. It seems your late-night visits have not gone unnoticed, Kurama observed grimly. They do not know who you are or how you are getting in. But they have sensed a change in the prison. The screaming has changed its tune. And it has made the jailers nervous. Naruto's time in the village of sand was running out. The quiet infiltration was over. The forces of this era were beginning to react to his presence. And he knew that when they finally moved, they would not be coming with questions, but with weapons. The future Kazekage's gambit. The net around the grand temple tightened with the quiet, inexorable pull of a puppet master's strings. Naruto felt the change immediately. The lazy patrols of the temple guards had been replaced by the razor-sharp vigilance of the Kazekage's personal guard. Their chakra signatures were concealed with advanced techniques, but to Naruto's sage senses, they were like submerged predators, their killing intent a cold current in the desert night. They weren't just watching the temple anymore, they were hunting. The jailers are spooked, Kurama rumbled in his mind as Naruto observed the village from his rooftop perch. Your meddling has upset the delicate balance of their prison. They know something has changed, and it frightens them. They don't know the half of it, Naruto murmured. He knew his time here was drawing to a close. He had given Bunpaku and Shukaku a path, a fragile starting point for a conversation that would take them years to finish. He had accomplished his mission. Now, staying was a reckless gamble. But he had to see him one last time. He had to ensure the seed of hope he had planted had truly taken root. It was a risk, a sentimental impulse that his rational mind, and the giant fox in his gut, told him was foolish. But Naruto had always been guided more by his heart than his head. That night, he moved with even greater caution. He became a whisper in the wind, a fleeting shadow that slipped past the hidden sentries. He could feel their gazes sweeping over the spot where he had just been, their senses telling them nothing was there. He reached the familiar side door and entered the antechamber. The air inside was different. The cloying scent of calming incense was gone. In its place was the sharp, metallic smell of iron sand and ozone. It was a trap. Get out, Kit, Kurama roared. Now. But it was too late. The moment Naruto stepped into the main corridor, massive iron sand walls slammed down, sealing the exits. Torches flared to life along the corridor, their light glinting off dozens of puppets, their wooden limbs tipped with poison blades, emerging from hidden compartments in the walls. At the far end of the hall, a figure stood, flanked by two elite guards. The man was tall and imposing, his face partially obscured by a traditional Kasa hat, but his presence was unmistakable. It was the chakra of the Kazekage himself, the leader of the Sand Village, a man known only by his title and his reputation for ruthless pragmatism. Later generations would know him as Reto, the first Kazekage. The ghost of the temple, the Kazekage said, his voice as dry and unforgiving as the desert itself. We have been waiting for you. For weeks, you have trespassed in our most sacred place. You have communed with our most dangerous weapon. You will now tell us who you are, and what your purpose is here. Naruto let out a slow breath. The quiet infiltration was over. My name is Naru, he said calmly. And my purpose was to talk to an old friend. A friend? The Kazekage scoffed. The demon in the cellar has no friends. It has only a cage. A cage you have been tampering with. He made a slight gesture with his hand. Seize him. The puppets lunged. They moved with a silent, jerky grace, a swarm of wooden death. Poisoned senbone shot from their mouths, and blades spun from their limbs. Naruto moved. He became a whirlwind. He didn't need a Rasengan or a clone. He used pure, unadulterated taijutsu, honed by a lifetime of war. He flowed through the puppet swarm, his movements a blur. A palm strike shattered a puppet's head. A sweeping kick turned a dozen more to splinters. He was not just fighting, he was deconstructing them, his every blow aimed at a joint, a chakra thread, a mechanism. In less than 10 seconds, the entire corridor was filled with the wreckage of shattered wood and severed wires. The two elite guards stood frozen in shock. Naruto stood amidst the debris, not a single scratch on him. I don't want to fight you, he said, his voice still calm, but now with an undercurrent of immense power. My business is with Bunpaku, not with you. Your business is with me, the Kazekage replied, a new, dangerous light in his eyes. He had just witnessed a level of taijutsu that surpassed anything he had ever seen. This was no ordinary intruder. You are an unknown variable in my village. And I eliminate variables. He raised his hand, and from the ground around him, a glittering, heavy cloud of golden dust rose into the air. Gold dust. The signature technique of his clan, a power that could crush and grind its victims to nothing. Naruto recognized the threat. This was a man whose power rivaled that of the cage from his own time. He sighed. It seemed a demonstration was unavoidable. But he would control the narrative. You're right, Naruto said. You should know who I am. He closed his eyes, and the world seemed to hold its breath. A torrent of brilliant, golden energy erupted from him, a sun being born in the confines of the stone corridor. He activated his nine tails chakra mode, his body blazing with a power so immense, so life-affirming, that it felt like a physical contradiction to the dry, sterile hatred of the desert. The Kazekage and his guards stumbled back, their hands flying up to shield their eyes from the blinding light. They felt not just power, but an authority, a presence that made their own formidable chakra feel like a flickering candle in a hurricane. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, he declared, his voice echoing with the combined power of his own will and Kurama's. And I am a friend of the Baijuu. From his back, the golden chakra coalesced, forming the massive, snarling head of the nine-tailed fox. Kurama's crimson eyes scanned the terrified sand shinobi, and he let out a rumbling chuckle that shook the very foundations of the temple. This one's a little more respectful than Indra's brat, Kurama commented to Naruto. The Kazekage stared, his pragmatic mind struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. The legends were true. A perfect Jinchuriki. A human who had not just contained a Baijuu, but partnered with it. The strategic implications were staggering. What do you want? The Kazekage asked, his voice strained, the gold dust swirling nervously around him. I came here for Bunpaku and Shukaku, Naruto said, letting the chakra cloak recede slightly, though the pressure of his presence remained. Your method of containment is a failure. You've created a feedback loop of misery and hatred that will inevitably explode. The seal will break, and your village will be destroyed. I have been teaching them a different way. A way of cooperation. Cooperation? One of the guards sneered, emboldened by his cage's presence. With a mindless beast of destruction? He's not mindless, Naruto snapped, his eyes flashing with a dangerous light. He's lonely. And angry. And you've spent decades torturing him and his host. You're lucky all he does is scream. He looked back at the Kazekage. A stable, cooperative Jinchuriki is 1,000 times more powerful and reliable than the tortured, raging time bomb you have chained in your basement. I have given them the tools to achieve that stability. But it is a path they must walk themselves. He had laid his cards on the table. He was offering them not a threat, but a better solution. A stronger weapon. The Kazekage was a man of logic. He looked at the shattered remains of his elite puppet squadron. He looked at the boy who radiated more power than his entire village combined. And he looked at the undeniable truth in his words. A weapon you can't control is worthless. A weapon that cooperates. That is priceless. You would teach us this method? The Kazekage asked, the wheels of his mind turning, seeing the potential. You would help us perfect our Jinchuriki? No, Naruto said, shaking his head. I have given Bunpaku the start he needs. The rest is up to him, and up to you. You have to stop treating him like a monster. Talk to him. Respect him. Give him a reason to want to protect this village, instead of just a cage to fear. That is the only way. He knew he couldn't stay. His work here was done. His continued presence would only make the sand shinobi dependent on him, and it would draw unwanted attention from the rest of the world. My time here is over, Naruto declared. I am leaving the land of wind. What you do with the knowledge I have given you is your choice. You can continue down the path of fear and control, and wait for the day your weapon destroys you. Or you can try a new path. A path of trust. He turned, and with a single, chakra-infused step, phased through the solid iron sand wall as if it were a ghost, leaving the Kazekage and his guards standing in stunned silence in the torchlit corridor. Naruto didn't look back. He walked out of the village, not as Naru the laborer, but as Naruto Uzumaki, the wandering sage. He had entered the desert a lonely boy running from his own mistakes. He left it as a man who had freed a kindred spirit and stared down a cage, setting a nation on a new and uncertain path. As he crossed the border back into the softer lands to the east, he felt the chaotic, raging chakra of Shukaku quieten in the distance, replaced by a faint, hesitant harmony. It was a start. One down, Kurama said in his mind, a note of something that might have been pride in his voice. Yeah, Naruto smiled, looking at the horizon. 7 to go. His journey was far from over. But for the first time, it felt less like an exile, and more like a pilgrimage. Alright guys, that's it for the video. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe. As always, the rest of the story is already out over on Patreon, link to that will be in the description. Anyways, until next time, peace.